care. We have especially built a relationship with HVAC, so they've been coming to the building to do their nursing checks on veterans. And we've also been checking with veterans who have private insurance or private care, because there are some in the building who are seen outside of the VA system. So together, it's, you know, a comprehensive effort to be able to attend to event. You know, there's not medical staff on the ground.
So I'd love to hear some more specifics. Maybe I don't have it, but the concept of higher level of care, I can't tell you how many case conferences I've been in my 30 years of doing this work, where someone in the case conference will say, oh, we need to get them a higher level of care. And to me, that's like angels coming down from heaven. It just doesn't happen. There is no higher level of care. There isn't, this is it. You know, permanent supportive housing, the supportive component, as you know, has case management built in, but there is no higher level of care. Your residential care facility is not going to be a skilled nursing facility. These people are living there. So we can't hope for a higher level of care to serve people who are sicker. So my recommendation is not to talk about higher level of care, because it doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean home care services can't be provided through HVAC. And if there are people doing home visits, nurses, doctors, nurse practitioners, etc., that's great. But also that's often promised and not delivered.
In this instance, I'm seeing directly that it is being delivered in the building. Again, I think it's the strength of the partnerships and working these different sections, and it's really staying on top of each individual veteran's needs, right? So in addition to that, US VETS is now implementing VSSR grants, so Veteran Support Services for Aging Veterans. West LA is a site, so we've identified 11 of the most veterans the most in need for aging services, and they will become part of that grant. So that actually is starting.
Great. Just again, like what happened with the housing navigator functions, where we did our best in this committee to provide best practices to the VA on what can be done in permanent support housing. Those services were not followed with recommendation. All the components of the best practices were ignored. Let's not make sure that as we move forward, the best practices for medical services is not going to be ignored. We're going to have a recommendation today to try to pump that up, but it does feel like the train is leaving the station and the nurses are not on the train.
Dr. Bamberger, we visited some of your sites, I think it was late last year or early this year, up in San Francisco. And one of the takeaways for us was the benefit of having those on-site nurses in the nursing stations or offices with clean stations. And so we began to incorporate, those hand sinks into small offices that could be staffed by a nurse. Now, where that staffing comes from, we don't have the resources that a nurse, the VA or some other external resource. At least we'll have the space for that type of service.
That's great. So you have built it. Let's see if it will come. And then IHSS services is always really a challenge in veterans services. Aid and attendant, which is the VA equivalent of IHSS from Medi-Cal, often doesn't get used to actually pay the person to help someone. Often is just a bump in their income. And that is more of a problem in my experience with the VA than it is with Medi-Cal. Because of that, many of the veterans we serve in San Francisco who need care, homemaker services, use Medi-Cal. Are you doing that?
We haven't had any veterans actually requiring that service yet. So I really appreciate you outlining and sharing what your experience has been, because that's absolutely crucial to being able to implement services in the best way possible. So I'd love to talk with you more offline and also hear about other gaps and cracks that you've experienced that might exist. It's really important to have that institutional knowledge as this is being done.
That's great. My guess, though, maybe you can comment on this test. I suspect the people who moved in thus far are not that medically compromised.
I wouldn't, thinking about the population on the ground, there are a few with more extraordinary needs. So things like memory care are required. And again, working with the different cases on the ground and with the staff, a lot of the support has come from us knowing each individual veteran's situation and being able to help care for them. So we're able to watch and see as their time in the building carries on, what they might need to be put in place in the future. So it's really anticipating the needs.
And then lastly, the Lockstone and Narcan, you mentioned another big tension that's happened in San Francisco, and I'd love to see if this is different here in Los Angeles, is that VA staff have not been given the green light to be able to administer naloxone or carry it with them in case they come across a veteran who has an overdose. Your staff, typically CBOs have been able to, but the VA nationally has not approved naloxone to be carried and expensed by VA non-licensed staff. And I think this is outside of your area that we can ask, I don't know who.
I do want to say that the training that was done, as I mentioned, was partly carried out by VA staff. So it was a doctor coming out to CTRS who had direct experience working with veterans we might have or substance abuse issues, who gave that training to the veterans. Our staff was trained internally by our clinicians from the Eagle site, but yes.
I mean, just we have like a dispenser, like an old cigarette machine, which has been replaced with fentanyl test strips and naloxone sitting in my clinic now. So a veteran can put his or IV up there and the whole thing and pops out naloxone, which is great. But if a VA staff happens to be there, they can't wrap it and administer it because nationally the VA has not allowed social workers or other unlicensed staff to be able to administer naloxone.
Okay, I think I've got the order right.
Sally Hammett for the record. Just to speak with about the social worker and naloxone, the national office is aware of this issue. They're working toward federal supremacy on this issue. Right now, the state of California has not endorsed or denied. They haven't given a response. And so what the VA requires is that the state licensing board gives something in writing authorizing this, and the individual is licensed in that state. So again, we're pushing and advocating for federal supremacy on this issue so everyone can carry. But you're right, social workers at this time are not able to. We are also exploring the harm reduction machines. Took some pictures when we were visiting San Francisco, and the chief of pharmacy is in support, the chief of HPACT is in support. So lots of discussion on that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, just regarding the carry portion of that, US Vets has a supply of Narcan on site. And so so the training was done by licensing commission, and also the veterans and building were given individual kits.
The uninitiated, could somebody just give a brief explanation?
So naloxone,
Narcan and where it is.
naloxone is the generic name of the brand name Narcan. So it's the same chemical, but I try to use generics, not necessarily provide one group preference. And it is a opiate antagonist. So if we had someone here injected with 10 grams of heroin and they stopped breathing in 2 minutes, we could sit here patiently knitting for 5 minutes. And then after 5 minutes, we could squirt Narcan out their nose, and they would immediately revive and have no untoward effects from their overdose event. So it works 100% of the time when someone's heart is still beating to reverse an opiate overdose. And given that an opiate overdose is now the leading cause of death in California for people between the ages of 14 and 64, it is absolutely critical that everybody carry that with them so that if they do come across somebody who was overdosed, we have the chance to reverse.
Okay, thanks. Rob.
Thank you, General. Brian, good morning. I want to congratulate you on what I think has been a tremendous amount of progress on buildings 156, 157, and 158. I mean, I think it's critical that that area now get developed after all the progress at 205, 207, 208. I wanted to step back and just kind of ask you some big picture questions about how you guys were able to do this so quickly. Is it the case that even like a year or two, maybe a year and a half ago, you were looking at the feasibility of 156, 157, and 158?
I'd say we were in pre-development. We signed the PDUL last June while we were in pre-development, and we have been applying for multiple sources of financing, including the state leasing capital, the county enlisted home capital. These sources began to amass, and then we made the credit and bond application last year, and it closed just last month. So, this slide up here shares with you a glimpse of where, I don't know if this was discussed yesterday, I wasn't able to sit in, but big picture, goal of minimum 1,200 homes. We're now at 600 homes that have either been completed or are under construction. If you include, and I see Cyrus from Core in the back, between MacArthur Field B and Building 158, we'll be at 741 homes by the end of this year. 62% of goal. By the way, all of you should have received the invite to the joint groundbreaking and master plan celebration next week, June 27th at 10 a.m. So if you don't have the invite, we can make sure it's resent to you all, but we hope you can join us for that celebration of progress.
And how far along are you on funding for 158? You said you were close.
We're fully stacked and we're closing in November. So we just got the credit and bond application is the last financing source. We received it. We're out to bid on our debt and equity, and we'll close in November, start construction immediately thereafter.
So from a big picture point of view, for all three buildings, approximately, it looks like 160 units, you were able to do all fundraising in about a 2-year period of time?
Approximately, yeah.
And so you've been doing that, I assume, with the recognition that in the AMI 30% threshold could be a challenge for a lot of disabled veterans. I'm curious to know what the experience has been like cobbling together these funding sources. Has it been easy to depart from this general preference for 30% AMI?
The funding that we've received, in some cases, we may have to go back and revisit AMIs, just like TSA did on Bill 207. There's now precedent for that, I think, with the county and with the state. So that's good news. But many of these applications have been submitted under kind of the original rubric of anticipating that there is a sizable population of veterans at or below 50% AMI. We are closely monitoring the lease ups of buildings 205 and 208 because those buildings most closely approximate this next batch of buildings in that they're not age restricted. And we will course correct as needed. The good news is we have some time and we have precedent now to adjust those AMIs as need be.
Okay. And then the related question I had, if I emphasized it, was you may have heard the discussion yesterday between the distinction between 1,200 units and 1,700 units. I just wanted to share with you part of the reason I'm concerned about keeping our eye just on 1,200 units for the present time is, and I just want to get your feedback on this. I think we ought to make sure that if there's buildings on campus that can be adaptively reused for housing, that to the maximum extent possible, we get those done within a 1,200 unit target. I'll just share with you my concern, and I'd be interested in your feedback, is I wouldn't want to end up in a situation where 3 or 4 years from now, we had 1,200 units of housing slated for construction, but we still had neglected or blighted buildings sitting in the middle of campus. So I'm just curious, if when you've looked around, you think all the buildings that can be adaptively reused for housing will be within 1,200 units?
That is the goal. And if actually you can please move to the next slide, we can share with you. If there's 459 homes to get to that minimum 1,200 figure up, the next slide will show kind of what we're characterizing as this next upcoming phase 2 of development. We've made a lot of progress on that north part of the north campus, that cluster around the 205, 208, 209 courtyard. Buildings 210, 300, 256, 13, and 258 are all existing buildings that are slated for adaptive reuse and are part of this phase 2 rubric we're working on. We've listed here the estimated parcel release dates. So we are, at the mercy of in the VA. One of the other ways this has happened is that the VA has been just a tremendous partner in terms of preparing parcels for release. That should not go that should not be understated. A tremendous amount of work between utility work, demolition and abatement work, remediation has been done, typed by Alan and his team at GLA, and want to acknowledge and celebrate that. It's just been a wonderful partner in helping to achieve this progress that we've seen here. But yes, the adaptive reuse of these buildings is a priority for us, and they are all squarely within this phase 2 batch of buildings we'll be working on next. along with those buildings in the town center, I should add. And, I want to note that, there are 10 buildings listed on this slide. To date, we've secured approximately $222 million of financing commitments from both the VA or the PACT Act. Now, those resources have yet to be fully negotiated into each E12, along with some philanthropic capital. And we're beginning to work in earnest on making financing applications and conducting redevelopment activities on these buildings as we go forward.
Excuse me, Mr. Sackman. Mr. Monroe may have something to say.
Oh, sure.
Sorry about that.
I'm curious.
I was actually raising my hand with respect to the prior AMI question. I don't think we reported out that officially the AMI levels were increased on 207 from all of them being at 30% to half of them are at 50 and 60% of area median income. So as Brian mentioned, there is now precedent there with the two state agencies, the county as well as the city of Los Angeles, to enable 100% service connected veterans to live at 207, and then we'll be able to continue to roll that out on future projects, as Brian mentioned. So sorry, that's backtracking one slide, so I'll toss it back to Brian to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe.
I'm curious.
Question for each of you, since you've got the mic, Brian, I'll go with you first. It's a question about income average. From my perspective, wrestling with federal, IRS, Treasury, et cetera, I think income averaging is one of the few tools we have at our disposal under current statute and regulation. But I know it has to be committed to very early in the process. It can't change going backwards. So are you taking that into account at whatever point you're able to in this redevelopment and in securing financing?
Yes, for the phase 2 developments, yes.
So where in all this will that kick in? Which buildings could it kick in? And what is your strategy?
What I'd say on the buildings listed on the prior slide that have not yet been fully financed at the end or under construction, those are going to have to be kind of worked out if needed, like building 207, where the regulatory terms were opened up and amended to allow higher AMIs. There are multiple sources that are driving this. Listed home, in some cases HHH, like the original project that were financed with city capital, and even TCAC and SIDLAC to some degree. Many of these projects were allocated as special needs housing projects, and by SIDLAC and TCAC regulation, those have to be at an average of 40% AMI. Right, so there are provisions to use income averaging, but when you apply as a special needs housing type, your overall average has to be at 40. So these are some of the regulatory impediments we've got to work through with our partners at the county, city, state, to address the issue.
Okay, thank you. And then Tessa, a question for you as well. The SSR, last night, first time I had heard about that, and there was kind of a perception around the table of us talking about this, that it wasn't broadly known. I'm not sure VA folks know much about that grant yet. So can you tell us a little more about what that is and how it'll help?
Sure. So it is a grant. We provide increased aging services for veterans who might have extraordinary needs related to age. The SSR is intended to provide for additional supports in terms of mental health care. It also provides for physical health as well. So veterans are identified. There's an initial survey that is done on veteran needs, and that is tailored to work from there. So there's additional staff that's being hired to work specifically with the aging veterans.
Do you anticipate some of these veterans being those living on campus?
Absolutely. So within Building 207, we've already identified 11 veterans who could benefit from the programming. So absolutely. It's a wider program, so there are 2 other U.S. sites that will have additional veterans within it. And we will be having staff on them visiting and bringing that program together in the sites.
And I know you talked about working pretty closely with that batch, but this would be a case where it'd be, and I don't know if maybe that batch knows already, but it'd be really important to connect with the GLA batch team and make sure they're aware of that can be there. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great opportunity.
It really is, and it adds to the capabilities of how we can work together. So Sally, you've been tremendous. Your team's been great in working with the batch staff and coordinating. This is another area. You saw the presentation yesterday on aging. So coordinating BSSR with that program as well is an important part of the services.
Great, thanks.
Jim Hurley and then, Keith. Cool.
I'm Jim Curley for the record. Brian, something came up yesterday that surprised me, because our project is Section 8, if somebody qualifies at 30 or 40% and they get a job, they can stay in the unit. But there was some discussion yesterday that there's some information that the veteran would have to leave their unit if they no longer qualify. I know we've got in our buildings, people making over 100,000 a year and they want to stay, and so they stay. So what can you respond to that?
And I will, I'm not an expert on project-based Section 8. I believe there is a moment at which the attendant portion of the rent exceeds the subsidy provided by the provider, thereby kind of negating the contract. So I would probably want to defer to either our operations team or perhaps TSA's operations team to address those situations. I think in our instance, they're probably few and far between, but they can, I think.
Correct, and it's a disincentive for working. Our experience is if the HUD rent, say, is 1,800 and they go have income that qualifies for above 1,800, then they pay the 1,800.
Right.
And they're considered a market unit, but they can stay.
Maybe you could check into, because John, you feel like, I think the issue is with the tax credit, not the voucher, because you can, on voucher, you go to market rate. The problem is that the tax credit requires certain income restrictions, and it's the tax credit funding that forces the move.
I don't believe that's the case. I believe under the tax credit program, you can be grandfathered in. There may be other funding sources that could require what you're describing, John, but I think this probably is best put to our experts to address this particular issue. Okay.
Keith.
Thank you, Joe. Keith went on the record. Just big congratulations to you both on all the great work you've been doing. And I just want to talk about, I'm glad you brought it up, Keith, as for the BSSR program, because I think for what Sally's work is and so forth, this is a big part of it. And my apologies if I neglected to give some background. So just really quickly for the group. BSSR stands for Veteran Support for Self-Reliance. It's a pilot program that we designed about 2 years ago and got approved by the governor for $25 million to put this in place. So a couple months ago, we granted 7 grants throughout the state, San Diego, one in LA that covers 3 sites, San Francisco, Sonoma, and 2 in one in Sacramento. Central Valley was the only region that wasn't represented. But basically what the idea behind it is, this pilot program is to try to offer additional support services to seniors or high acuity veterans, with the idea in the pilot program, they have to be enrolled in VET in order to be part of the program. So it'll blend really well with your efforts. So the folks, for instance, at Tessa site, folks who are already in HUD-VASH, the idea behind it is the money that they're receiving. I think you guys got 4 or 5 million in there. They're able to take that information, take that money, and actually employ, whether it's nurses, whether it's whatever they think they need in that particular situation. We left it pretty open in terms of let every grantee decide what positions they feel they need to fill out in their area. So I'm sorry, it's my staff handled it, so I'm not really sure where you guys are at on that. I know, I think the bringing on employees is likely this next 30 days or so. So everyone kind of decided what they needed, and the funds from the grant go to support those staffing costs, with the idea of the overall goal is to try to create more housing stability for senior veterans who obviously have their challenges increase as they go on. And it could be the whole gamut of services, but nursing is certainly something that we try to do.
Thank you for bringing that up, because it is a component, and I didn't see it, there's something listed in the supplements. So they would be visiting West LA, they would be headquartered out of, at this time, at Inglewood. So yes, it would be nursing staff through BSS principal.
Dr. Bender.
Josh Grimmer. So it's so interesting acuity levels at buildings and how that gets sort of culturated, right? So when you have a building without a nurse, then you put people into that building who don't need a nurse. So where are the people who are sick across the LA County, and are they being targeted for the buildings that you guys are creating, right? And I know you're first off, we get two others, but so one thing for Mr. Merchant, who's been there so patiently sitting for our meeting, and I'm speaking enough to come down again, but and join us, but you have a CLC on campus, and very rarely is the CLC, for those of you who aren't VA speak, is the nursing home that the VA pays for. It's that one that sort of looks like a spaceship on campus. It's a semicircle. Very rarely do systems of care go through nursing homes and say, these people actually don't need to be in a nursing home. They've been placed there when they were sick, but now that they're better, they could live in a less restrictive environment, less expensive. Supportive housing step down can be a great solution to open up more beds in the CLC and then get people out of the hospital and get this throughput. If you had nurses that were available, maybe through this grant or otherwise, would you consider going through and assessing all the people in the CLC and maybe find if you could get 10 or 15 or 20 folks who could step down for this housing and be able to have a more independent level of living, reduce the cost, and improve outcomes for the entire system?
Sure, thanks, Dr. Bamberger. And one clarification, the spaceship building belongs to Keith. That is the Calvin State Hall. No, but that's all right. We do actually have two buildings on our West Los Angeles campus that are our community living center, about 150 beds, and that is the term we use for essentially nursing home. We have another facility that's a little bit smaller on our Sepulveda campus in the San Fernando Valley that also includes a hospice unit. And we also have a part of our hospital building that is designated as a community living center for veterans who do require a higher level of care, at risk of saying a word, many of whom are conserved, who could live more independently, but we don't just have a place to put them right now. So if you look at the plans proposed for building 212 on our campus, which is adjacent to our CLC, just north of our dom and south of the housing, that facility is being redeveloped into something we really don't have a bed category for, that we're kind of calling subacute mental health, where those veterans who are not able to live independently, are conserved, but don't need to be in the hospital, can live. That project has soared in costs over the last couple of years, and we're working to secure the delta in funding that we need, which I think, Alan, is about $30 million. I think, sorry to get you on guard. We'll look at that. But to the other point, the space for those beds in the community living center is critical. It is a very big asset for veterans who qualify for that care, for family members who want to ensure that veterans who live in the CLC, and we do refer to CLC veterans as residents, not patients, are there appropriately. That is the, we, as you said, want to keep veterans in the least restrictive, most appropriate level of care. So if there were opportunities to do that, I think, of course, we would look at that.
And just one more technical aspect, and Keith can probably answer this because he's one of the best director for many years. Do people living in CLC qualify as homeless, and can they get a high-best voucher? And that is actually an area of great controversy, but one, again, that can be determined through a collaboration of HUD and VA. If that is being handed down as rules that you can't take people who are living in a nursing home and call them homeless, then they can qualify for the voucher. If not, then you do this ridiculous two-step process of kicking people out of a nursing home for a day so that they can then qualify for a voucher. You don't do that. So and that's just another area of technical challenge that I hope we can overcome, because I do think you could get a lot more efficient across your entire system by sorting people, putting on your Harry Potter sorting hat, and sending people to Hufflepuff and to Slytherin instead of to the nursing home and to support housing.
Just really briefly about the spaceship. So, and it's funny, I got to tell folks back inside the room, that's great. So basically how that works there is, you know, and this is obviously a big boom for our home as well in West LA because, you know, West LA is one of those that, you know, we very rarely have vacancies. There's various levels of care there, all from, you know, skilled nursing is for the most part. But typically, like in many of our homes, various levels, I mean, for instance, is really, it's a lot of domiciliary with folks with their spouses in that care and half for years. We're building a new skilled nursing facility. The VA is really jumps in the construction part of that. And then again, with the folks that are in care with us, based on their service-connected level of service-connected disability and so forth, we have some opportunities there to get reimbursed for some significant cost of care. For the most part, we did change our permanent status, priority groups in terms of who can be a resident there. And put homeless, you know, some years back now, 2 years back, but homeless as one of the priority categories. So it is an option in this kind of situation. But in the reverse, in terms of trying to step down folks out of there, and that's just not
Okay, let's let you get through the rest of your slides before we take you off stage.
Yeah, I have two comments that I'll share with you tonight, but just real quick, this is a kind of a running tally that we keep. It's not perfect, but it's, I think, directionally accurate of all of the sources and uses across every development, every housing development on the North Campus, including those by others, including Core, Step Up, and Shangri-La, et cetera. What it shows is that to date, more than $830 million has been leveraged in terms of financing commitments. So see, the biggest partner in this is the VA. A big chunk of that $263 million that you see is the PAC Act resources that have been earmarked. And that is in addition to all of the infrastructure and utility investments that the VA has made to date to prepare all these parcels for subsequent release. So this kind of concludes our presentation. I can just go back to two quick comments related to the Calvin home and the question about a higher level of care. You know, one of the benefits of trying to step down into housing is create space in Calvin home for veterans on site that do need a higher level of nursing care. And this speaks to that idea of a localized continuum of care on the VA campus. We have all the resources. We've got the shelters, we've got the DOM, we've got New Directions, right? We've got the Bridge Home, we've got on the kind of far end of the spectrum, we've got the Calvin Home, plus we're going to have 1,200 or more supportive homes, right? So we have the resources on site to provide a really effective continuum, allowing veterans to maintain their relationships with their neighbors, with their case managers. And I think for that to be effective, the VA, as the coordinated entry system operator, you know, I think has the tools to keep that continuum and really enable that continuum to take root. And so that gets to the referral process for all of the new housing that is being erected. You know, it's kind of out of our hands as the developer and property managers. It's really the VA referring tenants and clients to us for processing and entry into housing. And then just the last comment I want to make back to the question about Section 8 and TCAC, and at what point does someone's income increase sufficiently to force them to not be qualified. I think the issue is that in tax credit housing with Section 8, to the extent you are receiving at least $1 subsidy, the tenant portion of rent can exceed the TCAC rent, the underlying TCAC rent for the unit. But if the tenant's income increases sufficiently, to no longer benefit from even $1 of rental subsidy, what would then happen is the rent on that unit would revert to the TCAP rent. It would result in a loss of income to the development. So I think this is one of the issues that I think we're kind of dancing around a little bit. We will follow up with our operations team with a short white paper describing this issue, both as it relates to TCAP and Section 8 and the overlay of those two resources to provide further color. But I believe that is kind of the underlying issue. Are there any remaining questions for us on the VE team?
Yeah, we're a little short of time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brian and Tyler on the line. I'm often reminded in these these discussions, how naive I am. And it's perhaps wishful thinking on my part that this would all be settled business, but clearly it's not. So the lease up for a 207, frankly, went, I think, very well. Uh, Encouraged by the aggressive after action process you have. So we clearly have some momentum. Your agility, I think, has been a part of that. So I'm welcome for that.
And if I can, John KTLA, I just also want to thank the developers. And, you guys did a great job not only getting 207 open, but
Okay, I think next up we have Shangri-La. So,
Thank you for what you just said, because that's a big part in.
Yes, I do. I run into some.
With our home before, it was the only thing on that campus. We're in a situation where these folks were basically, they didn't have really significant medical needs at all, and it was
He's
part
one
of
of
their
the
time
percent.
versus nurses. And we
Oh,
really.
right.
State.
Your point?
LA.
Do you want me to?
Part of the continuum and change the way we take folks in the level of acuity they have in that home to really, because I think what they're doing out there is we want to sit, to Jonathan's point, we have some folks that probably, if things were different, they would probably step down into some other, the housing that's available now. But now we're more interested in the opportunity for them to step up in the case, like if they need that significant of nursing in a residential facility that they've just constructed. Perhaps that's the kind of resident we want coming over to the home now. That way it can fill that part of the continuum how it probably should have been since the beginning, but we were kind of trying to fill A to Z with the home, so we had a really very different situation.
okay, thanks, Keith. I understand that Shangri-La is on the line. Mr. Cowan, are you there?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Floor is yours, sir.
Mr. Cowan, we'll be running your chart, so just say next slide, we'll go to the next chart. Go ahead, over.
All right, next slide, please. I guess maybe I should have started, this presentation will be, presented with, between Shangri-La, Step Up, and the ownership entity, FFAH. And I think Denise, or maybe Ari might be starting this. I'll be touching on the slides regarding construction.
Mr. Cowan,
Denise,
you have to have your video. Please turn it off. It's eating up bandwidth. And I do believe Ms. Ari Meyer, Mr. Ari Meyer is on the line. So if he needs to go ahead and start, feel free.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, this is Ari. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So we'll get going. Let's go to the next slide, which is some statistics. I think some of you were at the grand opening in early May, which led to our beginning of the lease up. So this is just some of there's a photo from our grand opening and the statistics, which haven't changed, obviously. 68 units at 205, 54 units at 208. Let's go to the next slide. These are some of the key dates that have passed. We can just run through them quickly. You'll see them on the screen. Since the grand opening, the progress that's been made was we were able to pass all HACLA inspections on all units, and 208 it came in a few stages. And then by the time 205 was ready, we had it all lined up, and 205 passed all in one day, which was successful. So now we have the final HAP contracts approved, signed, and in place on both 205 and 208, which has allowed us to start leasing, which we'll see in a future slide. Let's go to the next one. So this is the progress of leasing. Is probably the key point of today's meeting, is to give you an update on where we are in lease ups, and I'll turn it over to Step Up in a minute and give a little more detail and exactly how it works, where it's going. But this is the bottom line where we are today. 208 started leasing first, and it is 31 for this week. Three are in process of moving in, so there's 28 physically in, with 3 happening over the next 2 days. So we put Friday's target goal, which we fully expect to meet 31 starting tomorrow. But we're physically 28 as of last night. And building 205, it's the first 5 have moved in, as you can see, and that's going to start ramping up as well. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Step Up. Either Denise or Nicole can take it from starting from the next slide, because they can give a little more detail about the lease up and some of the information that's on the next few slides.
Mr. Ari, can you identify
Yes.
the individuals who you are passing this over to so we can make sure we have them unmuted?
So that would be, I would unmute Nicole and Denise. Nicole Jean. Let's see if Denise Garcia on the.
Hi, everyone. This is Denise Garcia from Step Up. So we'll be moving through the lease up move-in plan. So again, I think you guys are pretty familiar with this process, but the lease up plan is that we get the referrals and they're processed through to property management once they're able to confirm their eligibility. And we're able to work with the client. We reach out to them and their social worker through emails, letters, phone calls. We set up a time with them to be able to come into our property management office, do an intake, and then we determine their eligibility for the property, meeting 50 or 60% AMI. Once we're able to confirm that they meet our eligibility, we're able to process the file. Next slide, please. Once we're able to process this file, then we're able to send it to our compliance department for approval, and we're able to get that probably approved within 2 to 3 days. And again, like I already mentioned before.
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Hello, how are you? This is Denise?
Yes,
Okay, great, Denise. Just a heads up, if you have your camera on, you turn it off and eats up the bandwidth, but the floor is yours.
Oh, okay. Were you not able to hear me before? My camera isn't on.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. So I guess I can start all over. So the VA provides the referrals for 205 and 208, and we're able to determine their eligibility that's sent to property management. Once property management gets the referrals, we contact the client and their social worker through email, letters, phone calls, and we invite them in for an intake. And then we identify their eligibility, collecting their and determining if they meet the AMI verifications of 50 and 60%. So next slide. We send the file to our compliance department, and it takes probably about 2 to 3 days for it to get approved. And then, as already mentioned before, on the prior slides, that VOB was received for both properties on May 6th, and that all remaining 208 and 205 had passed the HACLA inspections as of 5/31. Once HACLA and property management have both approved an applicant, a move-in date will be set and the lease will be executed. All units are fully furnished and will be stocked with local home kits, that allow the residents the initial for permanent supportive housing. And we do anticipate full occupancy for 205 and 208 to be within 60 to 90 days from the HACLA inspection of 5/31. Next slide. Nicole, Jean will take over from here.
Hi, everyone. This is Nicole. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you. So this is just general information about Step Up. Step Up on Second has 35 years of experience. We currently have about over 400 employees, and we've been a service provider for about 26 permanent supportive housing properties. Step Up does focus on providing housing and mental health services to those who need it. And we do utilize evidence-based practices, including housing first, harm reduction, and trauma-informed care. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more detail about Building 205 and 208. So the two buildings combined will be 120 veterans that will move into permanent supportive housing onto the West Olivier campus. And the VASH team will work with these veterans. The referrals, they have come from being on the streets, being in shelters, or being in transitional housing. So obviously the goal is to help them move into permanent supportive housing. And the focus of the VASH program, just in general, is to provide the street outreach, help them with benefits enrollment, and to support with making appointments with the housing authority. Once the veterans are housed in specifically building 205 or 208,
And then, but
Man, we lost your audio transmission. If you have your camera, you can turn it off because it uses a lot of the bandwidth. You don't need the camera because we can't see you and see the breathing charts. Over.
sure, I'll turn it off. Next slide, please. So just for those who may not be familiar, so HUD VASH, it is a program that is meant to serve the most vulnerable veterans that are experiencing homelessness and to provide case management services to help them maintain their housing, maintain permanent housing, and to be able to sustain independent living. And so HUD VASH does target those who are clinically homeless and those who are generally homeless to be able to support them with their mental health or physical health issues or substance use issues to provide them with the case management services that they need and treatment services. So for Building 205 and 208, all veterans will be assigned a HUD VASH case manager who will meet with them regularly to support them in securing their housing and also connect them to services that they need, whether that is healthcare services, whether that is mental health treatment, whether that is substance use counseling, to support them with their recovery, depending on where they are in their treatment goals, all with the overarching goal to help them maintain their housing within the community. Next slide, please. Again, for 205 and 208, everyone, all the veterans will be assigned a HUD VASH case manager, and the ratio generally is from 1 to 25 as far as the weighted caseload, and they're all trained and credentialed to provide the appropriate supportive services to the veterans that live in those buildings. The services, of course, are provided on site. From Monday through Friday, from 8 p.m. to 5 p.m. There is an on-call service that is usually supported through the managers, which the veterans do have access to on after hours. All case management services are treated with an individualized treatment plan to address the veteran's specific needs to make sure that the case managers are addressing exactly what the veterans are looking to focus on and what they may be struggling with. Next slide, please. Again, the goal, of course, is to help the veterans not just obtain housing, but of course help them maintain permanent housing and to provide them with the proper treatment services to help them improve their quality of life and ultimately help them end their homelessness. So just next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the services on what exactly ADVASH provides within Step Up. Just some of that includes being able to transport veterans and accompanying those veterans to their appointments, whether they're medical appointments or whether they are going to support them with their income. It helps them complete their paperwork for the housing authority. It helps them provide resources or any referrals throughout in the community, assisting them with job placement, assisting them with connecting them to service connection disability benefits, teaches life skills and modeling skills to help them budget their money and be able to properly clean their home and sustain good personal hygiene for those who may not be familiar because of their history of experiencing homelessness, and ultimately helps provide them therapeutic techniques to support them with medical and mental health care. Next slide, please. ADVASH will coordinate with VA providers to make sure that they are connected with the medical treatment, typically on the VA campus or sometimes outside of the VA, or whether that's psychiatric services, whether that's physical therapy, whichever services, of course, that relates to the veteran. The goal is to help connect them to those services to make sure that the case managers are addressing those needs. The buildings also provide support groups that are on campus, including recreational activities in efforts to support their social skills and reduce the isolation and increase the sense of community within the residents that live in that building. Some of those groups include art groups, computer classes, cooking classes, gardening classes, and coffee and bagels. We also have monthly events that is organized through different community partners, and some of those events include community dinners, movie nights, obviously to provide fellowship and community amongst the veterans that live in those buildings. We partner with other community organizations to support with providing food pantry access and other socialization events. Next slide, please. And just some general information, Step Up as a whole has had a 98% retention rate for members after 12 months of being able to maintain their housing. And we've been able to serve thousands of chronically homeless veterans. We've been able to support with job placement, been able to get folks engaged in food service, janitorial work, and assistance with employment. And the goal, of course, is to support improved outcomes of their mental health and ultimately help them maintain their permanent housing. Next slide, please. So this is about the funding commitment levels. I'm going to turn it back over to Denise.
Denise, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So funding commitment levels, bond financing through Redstone, it's, tax exempt bonds, bond loans, post completion and pre-conversion phase. We also have the City of Los Angeles Triple H loan. Building 205 is 93.7 funded, balance to be funded at conversion. And then building 208 is 90.6% funded, balance to be funded at conversion. And then we also have LIHTC investment, 6% funded per investment, document schedules, and then we have HACLA contracts for during our lease up phase. Do you guys have any questions?
Mr. Senator.
Yeah, I had raised a question with our last presenters around how's it going with ACLA and how are you working to streamline the process for veterans, because what I see is you guys are targeting very vulnerable veterans who it's very difficult to build their trust and get them to spend the time in the line at the DMV to get a card. I'm the federal government giving the most updated services letter. So it's really important that we make it easy for them on the front end and stop getting, not getting them running. So how are you guys working with that?
Yes, both property management and Step Up Services Department works very closely together to help the veteran obtain documents. So if there's any type of issue, we're in close communication with Nicole and her team to be able to help assist. And we help bring people over to Social Security or DMV. We reach out to the caseworkers. To have them be part of the process, but it's definitely been a collaboration for us to be able to move forward.
Yeah, you guys have a really tough job. I want to preface before I get to my next comment. You guys have a tough job. It's great to see veterans moving in, but what I'm hearing from the community is that they're getting a lot of veterans and the people that are trying to get them in or getting the runaround. They're having to do unnecessary second screenings. Speaking to one of our county contract outreach peers, he says that it takes about 20 hours on average to do all the running around and get these vulnerable veterans in the units. And, if I calculate and crunch the numbers, that's $450 for the county for every person just to get into housing. And that taking that resource away from the larger continuum of taking care of our reservists, National Guard, and the rest of the work that we have out in the county is really cumbersome, not to mention frustrating for the veterans. So there seems to be a disconnect from what you're reporting and what I'm hearing on the ground here in LA.
Yeah, I think that where the conflict is there's, to be honest with you, there's several different programs that are at play here. You have the tax credit program, which documents are only valid for 120 days. And they expire. And so if we don't move people in within that time frame, we have to get updated documents. And then property management gives their approval, and then HACLA does their process as well. So they have their own set of guidelines. So to be really honest with you, clients that are moving in are having to go through a couple sets of program guidelines in order to get approvals.
Yeah, I understood. Well, I just think that we're not working closely. We have to work harder because we shouldn't be putting the burden on the veterans and those that are doing the outreach. It should be on us as government service providers to figure it out on the line. So hopefully you're engaging with HACLA and the rest of the partners to kind of figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have been. I think that, to be honest with you, if I can be quite frank, my team is the one running down there getting a lot of the verifications and working with HACLA. Nicole is constantly following up and bringing people down to the DMV. So I don't think that it's just the government employees. I think it's all of us working together to do that. And we're trying to pass documents together so we're not sending people to multiple places. We're sharing of documents. So we are collaborating.
Josh Bamberger. Two questions. First question for you guys. Again, wonderful work. I know how hard it is to do this, having rented up too many buildings in my career. It doesn't have to be this way. So just to share where we have gotten in some of our buildings in San Francisco, we do these encampment resolution efforts where we identify a dozen people who we see through our coordinated entry are appropriate for housing. We move them in the morning and we sleep there that night. That's how it should be done. Project Homeless Connect was a great example of bringing many different providers together into one space. EMV, HACLA, et cetera, et cetera. Bring them into one place. Why not do this differently now? This is crazy. We've seen so many articles in the various papers about veterans who are just going from pillar to post with PTSD. They're not being served. We've got to do better. Why not do a one-day clearinghouse where everything's done at once? This has to be done differently. It just can't continue. There's a question in there somewhere, I'm sure. Can you respond to that?
Well, my response would go back to the funding, the type of funding and programs that we have is that with tax credit and how that works, I don't think that we're able to move someone in one day. So if there's something else that we can do as far as on the legislative side, where they can make changes literally to the tax credit program, we are all for them.
Okay.
It's a very cumbersome program and it has a lot of restrictions.
I understand. I didn't think you'd be able to solve it with a snap of a finger, of course, but I think we should set a goal. And again, report back to this group. What's the length of time between someone being identified with 4-day entry as being appropriate for building 205 and 208 and that they actually put their head up and pillow? It's probably right now, I'm going to guess, 176 days. Next time, when we get back here in December, let's see that as 34 days. Some progress in this because it's just unacceptable that we're re-traumatizing people. So don't answer. But it's a second question for Sally and for John. Who are these people going in? How have you selected them from the group of folks that you have of all the 1,700 or thereabouts people experiencing, veterans experiencing homelessness? Why are these 34 people so far or whatever it was selected? Are they all coming from CTRS? Are you using this really precious, beautifully developed architectural product for the right people? How do we know as a committee that you are targeting the right people?
John, so we started with the veterans who are currently in our intent higher need veterans. So the first group that was screened, sent for screening, because we don't do the selection, is the folks from CQRS. And then we worked through different programs of grant per diem and our other transitional, like ABH, coverage health. Go through those programs where we have people already engaged in services, trying to get them into that house. That's where we went first, and then we opened up to external folks who are occupying the list, but maybe not actively engaged in services.
It's just
First, let's get Ms. Hammond chance.
Sally Hammond for the record, CERS Chief GLA. Thank you for your presentation, and I want to extend an invite, and I'll make sure to get in touch with you directly, but I think it's going to be critical for someone on your team to be at our One Thing launch next Wednesday. I recognize that all of you are making efforts to get down to CTRS on a regular basis to ensure some services to folks and engagement. I recognize you're also kind of halting the referrals because of how many you've received at this point. But I'm wondering if there are plans to re-engage in that regular effort of coordination down at CTRS. And certainly want to put an invitation out there to you. I think we have to be intentional about these events where we bring our partners to the table. And I've seen it done successfully at housing projects and really, I think it would be a great time to talk about strategies like that next Wednesday. So I'll connect with you privately to make sure that you have an invitation. Thank you.
Just follow one last thing for respond to John. So John, if you're selecting people who are already doing well in low service programs like CTRS, which doesn't have nursing on site and so on, you're not going to get the wicked sick people as they say in Boston. So just wanting to point out that if you want to find folks who could really benefit from this extraordinary housing, which will bounce people into health who are really struggling, there may be other strategies too.
The folks who are in CPRS, general, definition of doing well, I think is another matter. We certainly want to be able to get to a point though where we have throughput, so people who are in CPRS feel stuck there, and we pass them up for other people who have not been engaged in services, and that I think feeds into sort of helplessness. A lot of people have come into CPRS, for example, or other programs with the promise that they're going to get permanent housing. So we don't want to let them languish and have other people simply jump the queue. We need to, where we can get, I think, stronger is have more people coming in faster into temporary housing solutions while we look at them very actively to get into permanent housing as well. So it doesn't mean that because you're not in our services yet, that you're denied permanent housing. Because we have so many other options. The EULs on campus are important, but by far not the only option. We want to encourage people to come in and not send a message that if you don't get into the UL on campus, there's no permanent housing for you. So I think that's to be very careful about that.
Okay, Jim, do you still have a comment?
Yeah, just real quick, I think it's helpful to move homeless events that are really vulnerable to CPRS first. Kind of send them, start socializing before they get in their units. Because going straight from the street to the unit, I've just heard feedback where they just don't last in the unit because they, their friends and their buddies are somewhere else. That's just one thing I would say to that. Additionally, I really appreciate Sally opening the one team invite. We are doing a lot of campaign resolution on the county side, and we're going to make sure that we're at the table with one team. So you will get an opportunity to hear about that work and engage in that practice by participating in one team.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, I understand you have some closing comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to be able to answer any questions about the development, besides for obviously the lease up and the services, which is really the key focus right now. But this last slide about the funding commitments, or in general about the development process, I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Any questions from them online folks? It looks like we have no more questions, so thank you very much for your presentations. We appreciate very much the information and the connections made to the process. Next up, we have core companies and Bill Group. Mr. Jahanian, Mr. Franco, and Mr. Ross.
Morning. Is this good? A little bit louder. All right. Thank you so much for having us this morning. My name is Alex Giovanni. I'm with the core companies. It's my colleague Brendan Ross with New Directions for Veterans. And yeah, we'd love to talk to you and share with you about McCarthy Field. A little bit about the core companies. We are based in San Jose in the Bay Area. We're affordable housing and market rate real estate developers. We actually developed a veterans housing project in the Menlo Park campus in Northern California. And so that's how we got our foot in the door for West LA. And yeah, we're thrilled to be here. So, thanks. We're responsible for developing the McCarthy Fields campus. It's in the northwest corner there. We split it up between two phases. Each phase is 75 units. All the units are one-bedroom apartments. All the units have dash counters to them. And there'll be 1 2-bedroom managers. Next slide. And so as far as the timeline goes, we began construction on the first phase in January of this year. We finished our slab and grade in May. Actually, next week, next Monday, Tuesday, we'll begin framing the second floor. And so we're quite thrilled now. Things are going to really start moving. I believe we have around 40 to 50 construction folks showing up each day now. So we're in full swing, and that feels good. August, we will have temporary certificate of occupancy. And so that's when we can start moving folks in August of next year, 2024. And we'll begin that pre-leasing around 4 months prior. And that's something we'll talk about here. And then construction completion shortly after. And the goal is to have it fully occupied by the end of the year 24. I didn't write it out here, but the second phase of our McCarthy Field will be staggered by around 11 months. So we're aiming to close on financing in November for the second phase and beginning construction by the end of this year for that second phase also. Next. And yes, so that's the construction update. So slab on grade, end of May, and now we're rocking and rolling with framing for the end of August completion. Thank you. Before I hand off to Brent, I just wanted to share, we didn't have a slide on our capital stack, but just so you all know, our project costs around $45 million, so $600,000 a unit, and a third of our funding came from HCE's BHHP program. So we're incredibly grateful for this program, and the unit mix that we kind of landed at was catered to that program. So we have a portion of our units identified for veterans experiencing chronic homelessness as well as experiencing disabilities. One of the challenges that we're learning as we are going through this process and gearing up for our lease up is that disability designation. If a veteran has a service-connected disability, they're entitled to compensation by the VA. I'm not an expert on this, so please correct me. But we're finding and we're hearing that there are lease-up challenges on this. If that's something we want to discuss. We know that there's Assembly Bill 1386 out there that allows AMI levels to be raised up to 60% AMI after 21 days of good faith efforts, leasing efforts. We really support this bill, and thank you so much. I believe you all are, or several of you are very much involved in that, and please let us know how we can help, because we believe that these units are better served with folks living in them versus spending 4 or 6 months trying to find the right. So thank you for that. I'll pass it on to Ren to go over the leasing process.
Thank you. My name's Ren Ross, a veteran, former Special Forces Army. Ever since I got out, worked for New Directions for Veterans as the Associate Director of Project Management. So we work with our partners in CORE in not only going after the financing, and we're very successful in doing that, but also in implementing the supportive service of the lead service provider on site. VHHP has about 28 enhanced services that are required. And so New Directions provides all of those services in conjunction with the VA, who obviously you guys have a focus on mental health care, physical health care, and those aspects of service delivery. One of the challenges that we have, we've been involved with lease-ups pretty much back to back ever since Sepulveda, New Directions, Sepulveda 1 and 2. And that's in the North Hills VA campus that was referenced before. We have seen the challenges through each lease-up, and we know very well the process and where those challenges lie. Specifically, we have been on the projects where those referrals start to spread out, and you have 15 batch units left on a 60-unit project, and you're about 2 months away from that target date in which there's construction on interest penalties for the partnership. And one thing that we've done as New Directions is we're on the VA campus as transitional housing emergency shelter. So we work very hard on trying to get veterans into the VA doors. And part of the enhanced services that we do provide is legal services as well to help veterans that don't qualify for VA services maybe one day get to the point where we can get that discharge status raised. Some of those challenges, for example, we had 300 batch units available in the county on one specific day. So the veterans have a lot of choices. It's not all a bad thing that we're trying to accomplish here. They do have a ton of choices. And I think, that's part of the problem out in the county. We have over 600 units that we are providing those supportive services for. And we do believe that having it on county is going to, or having it on campus is going to help a lot. And we do believe with the first projects that have come online, there have been a sufficient amount of referrals to fill these units, which is obviously a concern. We don't help any veterans if we don't have full buildings. And, some of the challenges that we face as well is, the lease-up process, which has been named, referenced multiple times during this meeting. We have found ways in order with strong case management to speed some of that up for our veterans. But specifically, they get frustrated when they're screened for VASH and they're approved for a tenant-based voucher. and they go through the entire process over again to apply for a project-based voucher that is tied to that specific unit. So that is where we get a lot of feedback of where some of the veterans get frustrated. We do recommend that it was referenced during this meeting that you have mass lease-up events. We couldn't do that during COVID, but it's extremely effective. If you have 12 VASH applicants that are available, bring them all in with property management, bring multiple property managers to screen them all. Also have the service provider or the VASH rep that's there to help them with the housing authority packet. So you have one follow-up meeting where they bring all documentation for property manager and for the housing authority packet. And so that's a way that we can utilize a tactic to shave that off. And working with the housing authority, we do have to hold them accountable by constant emails saying, you received this packet on this date. What is the status? I've even stopped by the building and tried to speak to the worker on the case and try to speed things up. I'm out there doing the lease up, helping the VASH team, essentially going out in the streets and trying to get potential veterans not making enough income to go get screened and begging the VASH team to do an expedited screening because we have an open unit that we have to fill. And the VASH team has been great. So this has been a working effort that we have continued to improve as partners. And, you know, we know the challenges very well. The 60% AMI issue is something that New Directions has been addressing in a different way. When a tenant has a tenant-based VASH voucher and they're going for tenant-based housing, they can have 60% income. At our projects, we try to have, for example, Sun Valley Senior Veteran Project. We try to have some low affordable units, tax credit units, in which a tenant-based VASH voucher can apply through lottery fair housing with a veteran preference and obtain that unit. And as you can see, we have wraparound services that address every single enhanced need of these veterans. And we create partners with Ultimate for dental and, you know, for veterans that don't qualify for VA healthcare. So we have a significant package put together to address these things. And so I want to hand it back to my partner, but I wanted to kind of speak to that. You can have low-income affordable units and still have services on site, and your 100% service-connected veterans can apply for those units.
And so how we staffed this project, we'll have 2.5 full-time employees from the New Direction staff to assist with intensive case management services, 3 full-time employees from the VA, so that's a 1-to-25 ratio. And then New Directions will be coordinating with third-party providers for law and dental and all those services that were mentioned prior.
Yeah, I mean, the breakdown of the units essentially, or the entities that are involved. You know, property management EH, we referenced during this meeting before, or it was referenced during the meeting that, you know, we have to work as a team. You cannot work in silos on these sites. That is not effective. In order to have a high housing retention rate, you have to, everybody needs to have their hand in the cookie jar helping everybody. New Directions for Veterans is not effective in resident service coordination without implementing the VA's treatment plan with mental and physical health care. And so it is very important that we have wraparound services, you know, during the life of the project, and our partners. And one thing that New Directions negotiates is in our deals is that the cost of services come out of cash flow. And so during the life of the project, as long as these units are filled, which we are very confident they will be, they will have wraparound services and all of these enhanced services to include, obviously, the VA case management. And property management is very important. And one aspect that we've run into some of the issues is property management needs to have a different set of standards in their third-party compliance program to allow for supportive housing, you know, the residents of supportive housing to get in with a more relaxed standard. You know, the folks should not be denied housing by property management for having an eviction. And so it is very crucial that the property management company has a third party in place to specifically address that. I I think you're very versed on how the Veteran Affairs operates with the intensive case management on site, so I'm not going to go over how the VA does their job.
Yes. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much. We're open for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Looks like Dr. Van Berger and Jim Burley.
Thanks so much, Josh Bamberger. Sally, John, can we have a commitment today for a mass rent-up event for the 2 buildings that are presently in rent-up? Can we give that a try, where you do, a couple months of meantime, you have people sitting there at their computers where you can look someone's income up right away? It always amazes me that, in an electronic world, it's a keystroke, but we wait 5 months for it. I don't understand that, but if we could identify the person who does that keystroke and either have them virtually or in the room and just pick one day, August 15th, we can bring 25 veterans in and bang it out that day and report back to us in December how that works. We will work to organize that.
Jim's in. I'm sorry, Jim Burley, excuse me.
Oh, it was an upgrade. Jim Burley, it sounds, I'm inferring, Brent, from what you said, that you have more problems renting offsite than on the VA campus. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. It is more challenging off campus. We're even in Orange County. We're trying to move up north to Oxnard, but it is absolutely a challenge off campus. For example, we have a project in Whittier Place Apartments Phase 2. If we don't get our last batch, we have the consequences on June 30th.
That was my next question in advance. I mean, if you don't get your initial certifications in, you lose your takeout loan, and lenders don't want to loan us anymore. It can be I don't know how big of a problem it is now. John, you spoke to it a while back, and my inference was that the veterans are thinking about units off-site, and they're not filled, then the tax credit investor and the lenders will be reticent to do deals like that, and it could really have an impact. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to the financing portion of this. So if by a certain date, and for this year it's like June 30th, as you mentioned, if 100% of those units are not leased up, they're not qualified for tax credits by fiscal year. And so say there's 90% of the units leased, 10% are not. We raise tax credits, assuming 100%. And so for our case, we raised, say, $20 million. That would mean $2 million of tax credits are now kind of foregone. And either deferred out to the end, additional years. And so there's a reduction in equity for that.
It goes from 10 to 15 years and 2/3. It's a big penalty. I understood. So don't you also have problems with, and I'm also assuming that you still have construction financing on a takeout financing until you're fully occupied. And I'm also assuming that if some of the big players like Citibank have some bad experiences and tax credit investors have bad experiences, then they won't be that interested in doing offsite. I mean, I consider myself lucky that we didn't try to do one of those because I would not have anticipated this. Anyways, I'm making a comment, and I guess maybe there's a question. I wanted to say that.
One last thing. I'm actually really happy that it brought that up because, so phase A, we closed on our financing in December of last year. 6 months later, when we got our tax credits for the second phase, rinse repeat, and the whole idea, we chose our original team to make a rinse repeat project. These projects are complicated enough. We wanted the same team. Well, over that 6 months, we had 3 major banks fail. And our lender looked around at the portfolio and said, hey, we're having a hard time leasing up some of these national units in Los Angeles. If you can't give us assurances that you can lease by such a date, or because we can't afford this risky debt. And so this is a near and dear partner of ours. We've worked with them on many projects, and we didn't take that lightly. So it really is a sign of the times.
Not only that, if you locked in your permanent financing at a lower rate and you lose that, then that's a big hit. It's a, I guess what my concern is if this continues to happen and lenders and tax credit investors are not comfortable lending to VA buildings off-site, you're gonna lose supply. Could you speak to that? How much of a risk you think it might be?
Well, absolutely. And there's another point I wanted to bring up as well. But the risk to, getting more investors coming in, it is an absolute risk because we have so many units that are available right now. So our team's been fighting so hard, even going to Cal Vets, trying to address the AMI issues. My recommendation was that you have a 30% AMI preference with chronically homeless, but that if you don't get enough applicants during the lease up, you can bump that to general homeless and 50%. And one of the pieces of data that's uncomfortable to collect is how many days it takes to get a referral per unit, which is what we're going to be doing now, because we need that data to show Cal Vets we need this adjustment right now in order to meet our deadline. Okay, any questions coming from online?
No, sir.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir. Okay, next up, GLA, that thing. Have a meeting presentation. The status of the 2023 project. Take the temperatures down a little low.
See.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead, please.
Morning, everybody. My name is Chelsea Blunt. I am the acting chief planning for GLA. Taking the incredibly big shoes of Alan Turn over there is a little bit more. Okay, so I'm happy to be here today to give you an update of our infrastructure project for FY23 and also take me into projections for master plan 25. We can advance the slides. We'll be two.
Can you hold the microphone closer?
Okay, I will. Okay, and one more. Okay. So to give you a little background on our projects in terms of FY23, I want to give you some context of the momentum that we've been, our momentum. FY21, we completed 5 projects to prepare the infrastructure to turn over parcels. FY22, we had 7 projects to do the same. This year, we are slated to complete 9 projects for infrastructure work and also the turnover of parcels related to the developments that we were talking about earlier with OE&M. We saw yesterday, we worked very collaboratively with OE&M to identify different parcels, the release dates, and to develop projects to support both the infrastructure and also the parcels and get them ready in terms of abatement and remediation. Anything that needs to be done to successfully turn that over. So for, like I said, for this year, FY23, we have a myriad of different projects, 9 in total. You'll see 10 on the list. The first 2, those are OE&M projects funded through capital contributions. They're managed by the developer. The remaining 8, we work very collaboratively with our contracting group and also the VISN. We are able to tap into the PACT funding. So our projects are funded with PACT Act funding in terms of the EUL projects. So it's great news for us. We were able to so far award 4 projects and the 4 are in procurement right now. So good news with that, we are on time, our projects are on time. And the whole goal of this is to be able to turn over parcels when they're ready to be turned over and to not want any delay in developing our housing developments. So FY23, very successful. We'll go to the next slide. We've planned projects going forward. So again, FY24 through FY30, we're taking the approach to, again, develop packages, develop projects that will, in advance, prepare our ability to turn over those parcels. So when we look at FY24, we have a few different projects for utility work. And actually, let me go back to the slide, because I do want to mention one project for FY23. You'll see the very last project, it's named EUL Security Support. I want to reference that one just because this was an FY24 project, and this will actually deploy 36 call boxes to both the North and South campus. This will enhance our ability to support security, emergency response. And we thought that was very, as more developments come on campus, more veterans are on campus, we want, our ability to support security. And certainly that's not the end result. There's going to be a lot more services involved with that. But this project in particular was highlighted by the leadership of GLA. And we bumped that up into FY23 so that we could accomplish the project faster, get it through procurement, and again, get it in motion to implement as quickly as possible. So just wanted to highlight that. We'll go back to forward one slide to future projects. And certainly I want to point out with our future project, this is the ones that we've identified thus far. In future years, we develop additional projects. So for instance, in FY24, there is the first project there is the Sepulveda wet utilities study. This is an assessment of the utilities on the Sepulveda campus to see, what the utilities are like and to see how we can possibly, develop additional EULs on that campus as well. So this is an assessment. Likely that will develop additional projects to, again, support additional projects to correct any kind of deficiencies and prepare our campus or our Sepulveda campus to possibly be developed into housing. So those are the type of work that we're doing FY24. We anticipate additional projects. We take on additional projects when necessary. I think in terms of FY25, you'll see that's highlighted in red. This is going to be a very important year for us. 2/3 of the housing will be developed. We'll have, hundreds of veterans on the campus. So it's very important that we take that time period to, the next iteration of our master plan needs to contemplate that this campus and what this campus looks like. So we've identified need to redo the master plan FY25. And certainly when we talk about our projection of what that process looks like, we want to make sure that we are in a position to do that, and like in the planning, we'll start in FY24. So I wanted to highlight that in those projects and just the progress of the campus at that point. And we'll skip to the next slide. So in terms of this particular information, this depicts the projects that are already awarded. The previous slides were our estimates. Those are our projects for estimated values associated with them. This list right here actually depicts the award dates and the funding, the award amount of each project. As you can see, we have about 2 projects left on the list to go through contracting and to be awarded. Again, significant work, and we can't do what we do without a partnership in many respects in terms of contracting and fiscal and the vision. It's been an incredible partnership to be able to not only plan out projects, but it's imperative that we execute projects to keep this momentum going. So next slide, please. So that takes me into the master plan projection for 2025. I know there'll be many questions saying, when are you going to start on that? When's the date of when are we going to commence these activities? And I can tell you that we've already started. So we heard from ULI yesterday, looking at the town center, what that's going to look like. That's an example of that engagement and that first step. And there's going to be a lot more engagement in terms of looking at recommendations and looking from input from this board, from stakeholders, from the community, from veterans, to see what this new master plan is going to look like, the next generation's master plan is going to look like. So I wanted to lay out the process. This was the process that we went through for master plan 2022. This is the process that it goes through in terms of getting the initial startup, looking at, again, engagement at every point, going through the contracting process for that master plan, getting it to the very end where we're, publishing to the federal register. So wanted to highlight that for you in the process. Wanted to also kind of show the concurrent process and the reviews throughout the We're going to engage on that very similarly. We go to 2025. So we're very excited about where this is headed and the progress made. And we're going to continue to endeavor on more and more projects and more advancements and looking at the future of this campus. So I know there's probably a lot of questions, and I'll pause there for any questions that you have.
Jim Center, so first. At Jim Center, just wondering, as part of the, and you might not have thought about this, 2025, as you're looking to redo the master plan, are you going to engage with an outside group like ULI to help that? Because my only concern is the PD team has a vested interest in influencing the way things go, potentially financially, but it would be really nice to see an outside organization like ULI or somebody else be asking a question, making a recommendation. I'm sorry.
And I think that's what we're going to go with is recommendations and get that input of what that outcome looks like. So definitely look forward to those recommendations and that input.
Dr. Benberger, then Rob Bateman.
Josh Bimber. Similarly, it feels like we're at a really important inflection point right now in the entire campus of the West LA. It feels, up until now, my vision has been that this is housing for people with veterans who experienced homelessness, obviously high rates of mental illness and substance use among that population. The possibility of having a community that's much more diverse, that has affordable housing for people who are, for example, veterans living who are making between $40,000 and $100,000 of annual income and finding a place in the place that he can actually live to thrive and change the sort of vision of what the future of this campus is going to be. From the planning department standpoint, what is it that you need? What kind of, who do you need to be at the table? What stakeholders are you reaching out to that and are thinking about bringing to the table to establish Master Plan 2025? How can we as a board be assistant in this process? And where do you see as the sort of benchmarks along the way to make these kind of decisions?
It's a great question. I think we're going to look for the team's recommendations to that. So I mean, in terms of it, the veteran input is absolutely important as we look at this campus and creating that community. What does that look like for them? To get their input is very, very important. I think it could be a number of different individuals, and I think we need to scope that out to say, what do we do for 22 and how do we do it for 25? And who was at the table then and who do we have to bring to the table now? So I know that doesn't specifically answer your question in detail of what was at the table, but I think we're looking for recommendations to get half of that audience who's going to give that.
Okay, let me get John to comment.
John PGLA. So one of the things I think we have to look at as well is what's the EUL authority. So currently we have the authority to build housing for homeless veterans. And if there's a recommendation from this body to enhance that authority so we can look at people who are vulnerable, so we can have the diverse community that we described earlier. I think that would be helpful.
Just a quick clarification on that. Is that a secretarial, is the VA secretary able to change the UL scope? I'm really losing it because this is not medicine.
I don't know. I think it's legislative, but I'm not certain. Could be regulatory.
Rob Bittman.
Good morning. Terrific presentation. Thank you. It was super informative. I'll just offer what I think is the perspective from the master planning subcommittee. We've used since 2016 this number of approximately 1,200 permanent supportive housing units. And you probably heard in yesterday's discussion that that number was settled upon before LA County committed to a target of approximately 1,200 units with HHH funding. And it was also during a time where we weren't certain whether we were going to be able to improve utilization of HUD vouchers. So I can tell you, I think the thing we'd love to see over the next year or two is some detailed analysis and projections of whether the number ought to be reset from 1,200 based on those factors. I think it's just good, prudent taxpayer sensibilities. We need to know that. And then I think I really want to applaud VA's openness to what ULI did with the town center concept, because these are novel development opportunities. And I just think it'd be great if we could do the same thing with other things like potentially student housing. Students at maybe UCLA, veteran connection. I think it'd be a wonderful contribution to the life of campus that could be done. So I'd encourage you to just keep an open idea to possibilities.
Alan, did you have a comment?
Yes, sir, I'm from GLA, and that's also what Jim mentioned earlier, and to address Dr. Emberger's question as well, in terms of engagement. I think this board has been instrumental in the last several years in supporting us, and providing recommendation feedback. And we've taken a number of those recommendations and implemented them. So looking forward to Master Plan 2025, as Chelsea mentioned, the engagement starts since last year, since 2022, when the master plan was signed. And we continue to take input and continue to engagement leading up to the next iteration of the master plan. Right now, we're projecting 2025 because, like you said, is a pivotal point. By 2025, I think if my number is correct, we would have roughly about 768 units online for veterans. And in addition to that, 1,013 units. That is a combination of in construction or already ready for occupancy. The target of the 1,200 is very achievable, and we're right there. 2025 is that pivotal year, and we will start the process in 2024 in terms of the contracting process and the continuing engagement to do that. 2016, when the draft master plan was developed, great process in terms of stakeholder engagement, and we're looking back at those historical documents as well, those organizations as well, and move them into the mix and re-engage and continue to engage to develop 2025, because we did up till now and to projecting to 2025. I think we have a pretty clear picture of what we need to build on the campus and that commitment of the 1,200 unit. But to Anthony Altman and Rob's comment yesterday is that what are we building beyond 2025? And that's where the analysis, the assessment, the need, taking into consideration inventory in the community, what is available out there to help us inform what we're going to build beyond 1,200 units.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Ms. Black, thank you very much. Just before our next briefers here, we got a package. Yeah, it's package. I'm serious. It's from the fourth floor, the Veterans America's Job Center. Thank you, everybody, with all this, the contribution to make it brings back. It says delicious donuts, so.
They're
It's hard with this.
I've never seen it.
I got
Oh.
Please enjoy this.
They're smart with it.
Chelsea flower.
Okay, we're gonna figure that out. I shall grade the donuts for you.
Not yet, sir.
For those online, we are waiting for the next two presenters to join, so hang tight.
We're going to change the schedule a bit. We're going to take up the services subcommittee's recommendation. Then we'll break for lunch. And when they come back, they get here, we'll take that presentation again. So we'll find your seats, please. We need that form.
That's the best we can do.
They get up.
One more. Okay, so this is actually 20-2. Got to change to 20-1 first. So this is actually 20-1. I'll change that later.
Okay.
No, it'll be 2001 at the end of the day. Modified.
Okay.
For those attending virtually, this is actually recommendation 20-01 instead of 2.
Okay.
Okay, I think we have a quorum. We're considering now VCOEB recommendation 2001, excuse me, 20-01. And I'll ask to walk us through this.
Okay, this one is the work of the services subcommittee, and it has to do with, what a surprise, nursing and supportive housing. So I will read this. We did acculturate this with our subcommittee and asked for leadership to weigh in, and this is a product of that input. Whereas permanent supportive housing is the best solution to end veteran homelessness, whereas veterans experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles are growing older, with the average of now exceeding 50 years old. Whereas as people age, their medical needs increase and their ability to adhere to medication and benefit from medical recommendations decreases, resulting in increased preventable hospitalizations and medical costs. Whereas on-site nursing care integrated into project-based permanent supportive housing has been shown to reduce preventable hospitalizations and improve health outcomes for a subset of people experiencing homelessness with chronic medical conditions. Whereas in one representative sampling of people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco, 10% of the total homeless population were assessed to need on-site nursing services to prevent a rapid deterioration of their medical condition. Whereas the development on the VA campus in West LA is expected to have at least, shall we say, Rob, 1,200 units of permanent supportive housing. Now, therefore, let it be recommended the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs Administration instruct the leadership of the VA of Greater Los Angeles to provide funding and staffing to place at least 2 full-time registered nurses in at least 2 of the proposed project-based facilities on the West LA campus to serve at least 120 unduplicated veterans with chronic medical conditions of the whereof the VCOEB produced on the 2nd, 2023. Need a second.
Well, we need a motion first. Motion to approve. Motion, Josiah. Okay. Second.
Second. Christine Stanley.
Okay, second, Ms. Stanley. Any discussion?
Jim Zenner, yeah, I think this is a great motion, much needed. Really, the principle of housing first is you have your medical as well as social staff on the bottom floor, so they can see the veterans coming in and out of where they live. And that's kind of what we call in the mental health world, like a or a no, not an SME, a mental status is an MSE, I'm getting this license. MSE, mental status exam. So you can see if a veteran's struggling just as they're walking by your house. Fair housing laws, you can't mandate treatment, and so it's very important to have eyes on your veterans that are residents, and this is a step in that direction. Yeah. Our medical staff, our nurses have those eyes on their patients.
Any other discussion? Hearing no further discussion, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Recommendation passes.
Let's have a This is Sally.
Good morning. Let's, why don't we go with one and then we'll be ready to what we'll try to do is take our lunch break and then the folks traveling back here from the GLA campus should have time to get here, get the breath.
Yeah, in general, this next recommendation is just the website hosting. Maybe a pretty brief discussion.
If the lunches have not been delivered, then we will take a brief discussion. Okay, let's move on to the first recommendation from the master plan subcommittee.
Great. So we have 2 recommendations today, and I think we'll tackle this one before lunch. And I think I'd like Anthony Allman to read it. He did a good portion of the draft, but he has to be unmuted. He is.
Yes, sir.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, loud and clear.
Great, thank you. Shall I begin, General?
Yes, please, go ahead.
VCOEB recommendation 20-02, I believe we would have to make this edit, correct?
Go ahead, Anthony. My typos last night. Go ahead.
Okay. Whereas the Veterans and Community Oversight and Engagement Board, VCOEB, is a federal advisory committee established by the U.S. Congress in the West LA Leasing Act of 2016. Whereas Congress stated that the VCOEB should be formed for the following purposes. A, identify the goals of the community and veteran partnership. B, provide advice and recommendations to the Secretary to improve services and outcomes for veterans, members of the armed forces, and the families of such veterans and members. And C, provide advice and recommendations on the implementation of the draft master plan approved by the Secretary on January 28, 2016, and on the creation and implementation of any successor master plans throughout the course of its work. Whereas Congress stated that the VCOEB's work would involve public outreach and participation by the board shall A, provide the community opportunities to collaborate and communicate with the board, including by conducting public forums on the campus, and B, focus on local issues regarding the department that are identified by the community, including with respect to healthcare, implementation of the draft master plan, and any subsequent plans, benefits, and memorial services at the campus. Whereas the VA Advisory Committee Management Office currently maintains VCOEB's website, which includes a board photo, a mission statement, the charter, and some minutes and response packets from Office of the Secretary to the VCOEB's recommendations. Whereas currently, the website does not provide the public a full or adequate accounting of VCOEB's research and activity to date, and as a result is not possible for interested members of the public or for committee members to access the full record of the Federal Advisory Committee's work. Whereas it is the opinion of VCOEB that the full breadth of the Advisory Committee's work should be available online for public inspection. In doing so, it will provide the public with a full accounting of VCOEB's efforts to fulfill its congressional charter while promoting transparency and opportunities for collaboration with the community. Now, therefore, let it be recommended on June 22nd, 2023, recommendation 20-02 alpha. The Secretary of Veteran Affairs tasked the VA Advisory Committee Management Office to post all agendas from past meetings. Recommendation 20-02 Bravo. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs tasked the VA Advisory Committee Management Office to post all briefing materials from past meetings. Recommendation 20-02 Charlie. The Secretary of Veteran Affairs tasked the Advisory Committee Management Office to post all minutes from past meetings to include video recordings if available. You still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can still hear you.
Great. Recommendation 20-02 Delta. The Secretary of Veteran Affairs tasked the VA Advisory Committee Management Office to post all recommendations as adopted by the board from past meetings. Recommendation 20-02 Echo. The Secretary of Veteran Affairs tasked the VA Advisory Committee Management Office to post all Office of the Secretary response packets from past meetings. Recommendation 20-02 Foxtrot. The Secretary of Veteran Affairs tasked VA Advisory Committee Management Office to organize all aforementioned material by VCOEB meeting in reverse chronological order to facilitate a streamlined organizational structure for archival information. I believe we'll wait for a motion.
Thank you. Standing by for a motion.
I would make a motion to adopt.
Okay, motion to approve. Second the motion. Second the motion, Dr. Willis. Any discussion?
Sir, this is Anthony. Just a quick comment.
Yes.
So for a lot of the members of the Federal Advisory Committee, we're coming up on our 6-year mark. And I think over the past 6 years, we've done a lot of research, a lot of investigating, a lot of time went into recommendations. And, you know, from my perspective, as a Federal Advisory Committee, as a public oversight community body, all of our work should be accessible online. And that's basically the gist of the recommendation, is that, you know, the full sunlight approach. Everything from agendas, briefings, so on and so forth, be available. And so anyone can look at our history and see what we've done over the past 6 years. So that's all I'll offer there.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Mr. Van.
Thank you, John. I have just one thought, which is, as we thought about trying to recruit additional board members over the past year because of the big turnover we're facing, it's made me realize how hard it is to assemble all of our past work to get people interested and informed. And I think that's critical. I think we should all look upon this board as something that could exist for 10 more years, at least. And it becomes very important to institutionalize the knowledge and make it super accessible. So you'll see that we made a bunch of subordinate recommendations because we really do think getting each of these elements right is important. Listing them in reverse chronological order strikes us as important, so people can tell what the deep history is and what the recent history is. And I think, you know, we're open to different ways in which this can be accomplished. It may be technically hard for VACMO to do it, but I think this all has to be put online so that there's a good record of past work.
Any further comments, discussions? Okay, hearing none. All in favor of the recommendation, say aye. Opposed? Recommendation passes unanimously. Okay, now can we get in?
I think Mr. Elman has a comment.
Okay, Anthony, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I meant to get in a comment before the vote, but the other thing I would just say is I think that this sets a foundation for how VA should treat all of its federal advisory committees. And so I think, you know, if we're successful in offering the recommendation, which we will, and the secretary concurs, I think that this is something that can be offered throughout the VA system. Because I've looked at the ACMA website to see what the other federal advisory committees are up to, and it's difficult. It's not easy. And so I think VCOEB can perhaps lead this transformation at ACMA.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Allen. Okay, we voted to approve this recommendation, and even though this, Mr. Allen's comments came in after we voted, is there any effort to circle back based on the comments? I don't think so. Now can we have lunch? Okay, so let's take a lunch break, and then we'll reconvene our scheduled time to reconvene at 12:50. We'll modify that to 12:40, which is an hour. We stand adjourned for lunch.
For those online, we are adjourning for lunch and we will be back at 12:40 Pacific Standard Time. Thank you and stand by.
Kelly was unable to attend today. I'm Liz Swadiana. I'm the attorney for Bridgewood Resources. I act more or less as their general counsel. I have a very good understanding of the Swantel drill site. And with me is Araf Marzada.
Raj Marzada, I'm the subsurface engineering manager. I take care of all downhole operations for Bridgewood Resources, DBA 30 volts.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, floor is yours.
So I know we met with you all in the February quarterly meeting. There was a lot of questions about kind of what royalties are given to both the Veterans Administrator, the DAVA, and then federal government through the Office of Natural Resources, BLM. And so we've since got our head around all of the different wells out there, what types of royalties are given, what types of agreements are between the DAVA, the BLM, and Bridgeline. And so we wanted to come back here and explain to you what we found and answer any questions that you may have. So these are the two. So there, one of the last questions that we had were, what are the licenses and leases in place? So there's really two federal leases. One which is a very large lease, and that was with the initial lessor was Dow. The initial lessee was Dowling, and that was between the BLM and the Dowling entity, which I believe there are. So there are 8 wells currently drilled under that lease. Then there's another extension lease, which is another federal lease, that there are 2 wells drilled under. Those are the main federal leases. Now, each of those leases have been amended through license agreements where the DAVA is included. So as noted up here, there is this amendment, revival, and extension of the revocable license for non-federal use of real property agreement. That amended the larger federal lease to allow for an override to be given to the DAVA of 2.5%, and also allowed for the operator to drill wells offsite of the federal lease, so long as it provided the DAVA with a 2.5% royalty. That was the consideration given to use the surface drill site location at the Veterans Administration's campus in West LA. Now, just so that you have a better understanding of that as well, the wells that are drilled on that site and are bottom hole in the federal wells, so that ones are wells that are giving a royalty to the federal government through BLM. Those aren't allowed to be on that site in general, just through the lease that was given by the federal government. However, as I understand, back in the late 60s, the lessee wanted to provide the DAVA with some type of funding for transportation, and they entered into this agreement to allow them to drill offsite wells, and also to give a 2.5% royalty on each well that was currently drilled under that agreement. Similarly, on the smaller federal lease, we have this, the most recent, which is the 2016 amendment to partial surrender of surface rights and ratification of protective oil and gas, which again provides for a 2.5% royalty on any wells that are drilled under that lease, but that are bottom holed outside of the federal lease. Now, there's 2 wells which are somewhat drilled outside of that lease. And I say somewhat because this is in the Brentwood Glen area. There's 2 bottom hole locations. They're drilled from the drill site on the DAVA's campus. And they're actually communitized with the federal protected wells. And so the federal, for each barrel of oil produced from each one of those 2 wells, it's about a little bit more than 60% is given to the BLM, and the other 39% is given to the private property owners in Brentwood Glen. Under the license agreement, or under this lease amendment, the DAVA receives its proportionate share of its 2.5% royalty on the portion that's given to the private owner. So I believe, if you actually go to the next slide. Next slide after that. So this is the list of all the wells that are currently at Saltel, all active wells, and it provides the royalty that's given both to the federal government, to the BLM, and to the DAVA. As you'll notice on the well names, there's DF12 and DF13. Both of those are bottom holed in the Brentwood Glen town lot area to the northwest under private property. But as you'll note, on the farthest column where it says the Office of Natural Resources, Revenues, Royalty, Interest, the federal government still receives out of the 16.6% royalty, which is what is allowed under this, this second federal lease. They are receiving a little bit more than 10% of each of the barrels, and that's about 60 some odd percent of the 16.66. On the other hand, if you look at the VA's overriding royalty interest in the next column over, as opposed to the 2.5% override, the VA is receiving a little bit under 1%, because that's the portion allocable to the private landowner's royalty, which is around 39%, as I understand. Otherwise, on every single well, except for the DF14, the DAVA received a 2.5% royalty, and the federal government receives a 12.5% royalty. Sawtell 2 is the one well, which is listed the well name SAW-2. That is the one well that the federal government receives no royalty under. That was drilled pursuant to the license agreement back in 1994, and it is bottom hole on a location to the southeast of the VA's campus. The DAVA still receives a 2.5% royalty under the license agreement for that, but that is the one well that the federal government does not receive a royalty on. So going on. Yes.
John, describe what bottom hole means, and then go for the 2.5%. That's 2.5% of what?
Okay, so bottom hole, means where the actual production is coming from. So we have directionally drilled wells. The surface location is on a drill site that is south of Constitution Avenue. I forget how many acres that drill site is, but it is it's a set drill site where every single well is drilled from. Now those wells, even though they're right next to each other on the surface, they are drilled directionally to have the end of the well bore where the actual oil is entering into the well bore produced on site. So that's that's what it means to basically be bottom hole on site. Now, what was your second question about the royalty?
2.5% of what?
So 2.5% is basically for every single barrel of oil produced, you receive 2.5% of that barrel. Now, obviously, we're not giving you the oil in time, so you're not receiving actually 2.5% of a barrel. The barrel is sold for, let's say, $100, in which case the DAVA would receive $2.50.
Revenue, not profit.
Yeah, this is gross revenue. So if the price of oil at the time is $100 a barrel, the DAVA received 2.5%. Similarly, for a 12.5% royalty to the BLM, the BLM would also receive $12.50 for each barrel sold. This is a gross revenue. It's not. There are no deductions for the cost to produce the oil or anything like that. This is the gross revenue royalty.
Sorry, question, John.
Of course.
Which ones again are bottom hole on or under VA?
So under the VA property, we have DF2. So just going down the list, DF2 is bottom hole under the VA property. DF4 is bottom hole under the VA property. DF5 is bottom hole under the VA property. DF12 and 13 are bottom hole underneath the Brentwood Glen area to the northwest of the VA property. But as I noted, it is unitized with a federal lease, so the federal government receives a royalty on its percentage interest in that. Basically, a unit is when you combine 2 or more oil and gas leases to allow for efficient production. And depending on what the terms of the agreement are, the lessors will receive a set amount of production. DF14 is drilled under the VA property. DF 15 is drilled under the VA property. Sawtell 2 is not drilled under the VA property, but DF 6, DF 7, and DF 10 are all drilled, hold under the VA property. One of the other questions that you had, so going to the next slide, separate and apart from revocable licenses, are there any outstanding leases from the VA? And the answer to that is no, there are no specific leases with the DAVA. All of the leases are with the VA. The only, the DAVA receives information from these license agreements. So going to the next slide, of the total amount of oil produced, how much comes from VA land versus adjacent non-federal land? So we'll get into this a little bit more, but as it turns out, currently the most productive well is the Sawtell 2. That accounts for about 55% of the oil at the Sawtell 2. Or well, it's actually a little bit less than that. It's I think it's about 45 to 50% of the oil produced at Sawtell either comes from the percentage or the proportionate interest given to the 2 wells bottom rolled under the town lot and then the rest to Sawtell 2. Those obviously the DFA receives a royalty on, but the federal government does not receive a royalty on Sawtell 2. Now I know that of these wells, Bridgeland does have plans to try to ramp up production on federal wells to try to bring those to become as great producers as Sawtell 2. Just going through this, it notes, the May 2023 average of oil produced from all the Sawtell wells was comprised of about 45% of oil produced from the VA land and 55% of oil produced from non-federal land. The average daily oil production of all the Sawtell wells in 2023 was 236 barrels of oil per day. Currently, 5 wells on the VA property produce oil from the VA property and ties with the VA property. Only the 1 well, which is Sawtell 2, produces oil from non-federal land. And I believe the Sawtell 2's approximate barrels per day is 100. So Sawtell 2 is the best well out there.
John Heimer again. Do you determine the revenue based upon the price of oil on a particular day, or do you average? How do you do that?
So this is explain how that number was calculated. Going on to the next slide. One of the other questions that was asked was whether we had any short-term capital expenditures contemplated, and if so, whether those have been canceled because of the city and county ordinances that are attempting to shut down oil production for capital investment. So Araf will speak to some of the things which Bridgeland is still contemplating and, items that in capital expenditures that they will be performing. As noted in the past, early in the presentation, please note that whatever money Bridgeland spends does not affect the royalty obtained by the DOE or the federal government at all, other than the fact that to the extent Bridgeland spends money to ramp up production, to increase production, obviously, the DAVA and the federal government would receive benefits because it's more barrels of oil are produced.
Yes.
Revenues through the oil. I know that we have a number of notices of intention to drill new wells that have been submitted to the California Geologic Energy Management Division, which is the regulator in California for the oil industry. Those have not been approved yet. Currently, at least the county's lawsuit would prohibit us from drilling new wells. Bridgeland has sued both the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles due to their recently enacted ordinances. In the city of Los Angeles case, arguably the city ordinance would apply to the 2-well bottom hole under town lot at Brentwood Glen located to the northwest of the DAVA's campus, and then also to the Sawtell 2-well that is drilled to the southeast of the VA campus. We are in negotiations with the city to allow those wells to allow them to continue drilling. One of the arguments that we brought was that the city's ordinance was preempted by federal law, since we have these agreements with the VA, which allow us specifically to drill at least into the 2-well bottom hole in Brentwood Glen.
Oh, it kicked me out of the meeting.
We're not sure exactly, how that will end up, but preliminarily, it seems like we will reach an agreement with the city at least. The county lawsuit is the bigger one, and that's the one that will potentially prevent Bridgeland from drilling any more wells and having to shut down the current drill site right now, since the DAVA's property is located in unincorporated Los Angeles County. We're at the infancy of this lawsuit, so we don't know what will happen. We just had a meeting with the county's attorneys yesterday to discuss some case management issues. It appears that this trial will be done in a number of phases. The first phase being whether the ordinance complied with the California Environmental Quality Act, since they had to do a certain environmental review before adopting the ordinance, and a number of oil companies have sued on the basis that that was improperly done. Then there'll be some other issues such as takings claims, assuming that the law was not thrown out earlier, where Bridgeland would argue that both the federal government, the DAVA, and Bridgeland had their property interest taken, and that the federal government, that the county would be required to pay them just compensation for the rights that they lost. We're obviously hoping that will occur, that there'll be a resolution to that lawsuit sooner rather than later, but we don't have a time frame. It'll probably take at least a year to get through that. Going on to the next slide, one of the other questions was asked, which what is the forecasted time to recoup current capital investments? So as we understand, all of the capital investments for all of the wells out there have been recouped except for the DF14 well, which Arash can probably speak a little bit more on this, but it's our understanding that that will be recouped in the next few months. I don't know exactly what expenditures were made on that. Arash will be able to speak to that, but generally, these pay out pretty quickly. Whatever types of capital expenditures are performed on the wells are recouped pretty quickly. To the extent Bridgeland is able to spend money on these wells, it would like to. And I believe going on to the next slide is the beginning of the Rush presentation.
Here we have 3 different colored lines. Blue is our water production, green is oil, red is gas. We obviously want to see the green going up. The higher the green goes, the more royalty payments that we can distribute out. Oil, as you see, has been climbing up. There's a little stabilization towards the end. If you can read these months, the end is June there. We definitely ramped up from when our ownership took over. We hope that it's going to continue to climb. The water going down is good news. We don't want to produce water. And the gas going up also is good news because that attributes to some dollars saved. So, but the big news here is that the green is going up and we want it to keep going up. Here we have some of our recent successes. DF1 injector, so we get rid of all our water on site, we inject it back into the formation, not just to save on money with trucking, but it also maintains the pressure of the downhole reservoir. By doing that, we keep our oil production up. DF4 cold rod conversion. I'm not going to bore you with the technicalities on this, but the DF4, that's one of the projects we mentioned during the February meeting. That job was a success and is currently running right now with very consistent production. DF12, that's another well that we turned on. It is still doing very well. It's actually continuing to improve. DF8, that's another injector that will provide additional pressure support and thus help increase or stop our oil from declining by keeping the pressures up downhole. DF14, that's the one well that we're still waiting to recoup costs from. We were successful in that job. That was mentioned. We were planning on doing it during the February meeting. It went well. I'll mention a little hookup hiccup that we had on it. Next slide. And also enhanced chemical program is just keeping our wells from running longer with less downtime when they go down, keeping them producing without having to shut it down and waiting several weeks for a workover rig to fix it. It helps keep production up that way. Some of our challenges, DF14, that same well I just mentioned, the surface unit had a failure. The repair is pretty easy, but it requires some specialty parts. But that staying down does not affect any royalties given out because that's actually the one well that is not subject to the royalties. And it's honestly not that great of a well. Sawtell 2, which is our crown jewel, that one has lost a little bit of efficiency this past month. It's not due to the total potential fluid that this well can make, but it has gone down due to worn pump. We do plan on working on that well, pulling the pump out, replacing with a new one, and we'll get that 35 or 40 barrels of oil back. Hopefully get it to around 140 total barrels produced. And the next two, DF5 and DF2, those are two wells that failed previous to our February meeting, failed at the end of 2022. I'll mention which one of those we plan on repairing shortly. Upcoming projects to drive up some production, and all of these will be subject to the royalty payments. So it's in all of our interests that we want some of these wells back online. Starting with DF2, it's a bit of an expensive project, but it's definitely worthwhile, and we think it's going to act like DF12 that I previously mentioned. It's good for about 32 barrels of oil, and we plan on completing it hopefully by the end of July. So it's coming up here. Generator restoration. This is part of an effort of going green as well as saving some operating costs. It will help us produce electricity on site with our gas production from the wells. DF7 is a CalGEM, it's a regulatory agency, requires us to pressure test and make sure that we have mechanical integrity of all wells, especially when they go idle. When they're not used for a certain amount of years, they want to make sure that it's still perfectly functional. So we do have to do that test. Requires pulling all the equipment out. It's rather extensive, but It's needed to keep in regulatory compliance. DF9, that's another injector. We have to do some repairs, pretty extensive repairs, but again, that will help with the pressure support, hopefully drive up oil production by injecting more water into the ground to essentially replace anything that we produce. We want to replace it with that water. And finally, DF6, that's an ad pay, and that one is still possible even with current ordinances. We hope to perforate some certain oil sands in that well and get some more production. New drill wells, that's a little bit more longer term. It's obviously subject to what happens with our different lawsuits and ordinances and how that goes. Some projects I mentioned during the February meeting, one of them was the DF4 Rotoflex install. That involves putting a very massive unit on the site, and it looks like we don't need to do that anymore. Our current project is performing better than we even thought, even with a very small little baby unit. So we don't need to upsize that at this time. The gain in oil production is very marginal at this point. The permitted job I mentioned, DF6, back in the 90s, it's an interesting story. During one of the massive rains in Los Angeles, it flooded the entire area, and the well was being worked on at the time. And somehow they left it open where all the rainwater flooded into that well for who knows how long. The well never really came back after that. All the oil production dropped. We hope to repair the damage. We think what happened is the rainwater caused the rock to swell and dropped off all the oil production. And this well was a really good well, and it could potentially rival Sawtell too. If it works out well, we hope it will be a hidden gem that will find and restore a lot of production. But we'll see. High risk, high reward. Is this back to you?
So there was one other question that was asked in the email to Bridgeland, which was, has the operator explored any technologies that will address the health effects that have been the basis for the regulatory actions in these two, in the city and the county ordinance? If so, what are the costs and feasibility? To our knowledge, Bridgeland follows all current regulatory laws. We have not had any issues with the air quality management district rules. There haven't been any unpermitted venting or any types of leaks out at the drill site. So, Bridgeland follows all health and safety regulations applicable to this site. And we do not believe that this site specifically is considered a health hazard in any way. We haven't heard of any tests of any types of violations on this site. And so it's still Bridgeland's position that this site does not have any health issues. Now that is the end of our presentation. If there's any other questions that you would like to ask, please let us know. We're here to answer anything you might have.
Mr. Bannon. Thank you, Rob Baglan, for the record. Gentlemen, thank you for this presentation. You did an excellent job answering all the questions posed. I really appreciate the completeness of it. Obviously, something that we're wrestling with as a board is in 2016, Congress weighed in with the West LA Leasing Act, and at least as it relates to leases, what Congress says is that everything that's happening on the campus ought to principally benefit them. We've been working our way through 2 low IP reports that have wrestled with oil production on behalf of them. So that's why we've asked you guys here. And I appreciate your attempt to educate us and kind of also untangle the complicated nature of the production, both under, I guess, a BLM lease and a VA revocable license. And as I understand it, even the revocable license with the VA was once the subject of an earlier lease agreement that was just allowed to lapse. So it's been a long running thing. So I guess I had a bunch of small but precise questions for you. we were able to get a copy of the BLM lease. And as I read the lease, it's of indefinite duration so long as the lease is producing and paying. Is that your basic?
Yes, that is correct. That's generally how oil and gas leases work. There is a primary term where you are allowed to drill wells. I think under the BLM lease, it's 5 years, which is pretty typical. And then so long as oil and gas is producing and paying quantity, the lease remains effective.
And I'm not a oil and gas lawyer, but I would guess the term paying quantities means it's profitable.
Exactly.
And I guess based on what you're telling us, if something like 55% of the production is coming off of the BLM lease, that's a financially productive lease.
Yes, I mean, so generally when you're looking at producing and paying quantities, so long as there is one well that is profitable, then that would be holding the entire lease. A number of the wells currently that are out there are so.
Okay. So as it stands now, the BLM lease is a continuing course for years on end. The VA license will expire 2027, if not.
Correct.
So this is where it's a little be a little subtle. Am I right that does the exercise or the performance of the BLM lease require use of VA service property?
Yes, so under the BLM lease, I actually think it's like this first section, it does allow use of the surface to perform the oil and gas activities. I think where you're going with this is to the extent the DAVA wanted to revoke the lease, the license, kind of what would happen, right? It's my understanding that so long as oil and gas is produced and paying quantities from the federal leases, that those well bores would remain in place due to the power granted by the federal government. The one well that would likely have to be plugged and abandoned would be the Sawtell tube, which the federal government does not receive a royalty on, only the DAVA receives a royalty.
All right. Shifting gears. You said that you've filed state court actions against both the city ordinance and the county ordinance. And you explained to us you think you may reach a deal with the city, but the county is much more active exercise. I take it the county action, as you say, is a multi-party action where there's lots of plaintiff oil producers, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you're all along for the same ride in front of one judge, and it's going to be a long process.
It's not going to be short, I'll tell you that. So just to kind of back up and let you have a little bit more understanding about the types of claims that are in that lawsuit. So Bridgeland filed its lawsuit a few months after 2 other companies filed a lawsuit. There was one company, the Termo Oil Company, which filed its lawsuit, I believe it was within 35 days after a notice of exemption was filed under the California Environmental Quality Act, which was the implementations. And then a coalition of oil companies known as NOPEC also filed a lawsuit. Now, both of those lawsuits include claims that the county violated the California Environmental Quality Act by improperly performing its environmental review. Those claims are generally fast-tracked. You're supposed to have a ruling on those within about a year. Currently, now the only impediment to having briefing on those issues is the compilation of the administrative record, which is basically everything that the county considered in making its decision to adopt the ordinance. As I understand from my call with the county's attorneys yesterday, we expect the administrative record to be certified sometime in October, which will allow the court to give a briefing schedule. I would think that briefing on that specific claim would be 5 months from then, and then we would have a hearing on that specific claim, probably by next July or August. So in about a year from now, we'll probably have a resolution on that one claim. I will say that I believe that the oil companies have a very good chance of success on their CEQA claim, and to the extent any oil company is successful on that CEQA claim, the entire ordinance will be thrown.
And then the related question would be, in the county action, are you able to assert a supremacy clause argument with respect to federal leases for revocable licenses?
That we are the only company to have done that because we're the only one with a federal lease, and that claim was made. That will be heard during the phase 2 of this trial, which is dealing mostly with the state preemption, both the state and federal preemption issues. Just so that you know, a number of oil companies have made the argument that the state of California's laws trump the county's ordinance, so the county's ordinance is prohibited by the state's preemption of this issue. Bridgeland also brought the federal preemption claim saying that, look, this is a federal lease and the county is not allowed to tell us, to tell the federal government that it can't lease out its own minerals. So that we are trying, we broached the topic of discussing whether the county would allow Sawtell to continue to produce and not be subject to this ordinance because of the federal lease. They said that they would go back, check everything and make a determination. I don't know what they're going to say. I know that at least the city of Los Angeles, when we made the same argument, really did not want to have to fight that argument at all. They thought that it mucked up their lawsuits, like, their claims against everyone else. And they're basically agreeing to settle with us because of our federal claims.
The big picture, before the revocable license with the VA comes up for renewal in the spring of 2027, you all will have probably gotten some guidance from the judge on the enforceability of the city and the county ordinances as it relates to these particular pieces of license, right?
Yes, I would think so. I mean, it's probable that we'll still be on appeal on a few of those claims, but I would think that the trial court actually would be done with that.
That's helpful. That's really helpful to know. It just allows us to exercise our basic stewardship role. So I think probably a year from now or a year and a half from now, we'll be interested to get an update from.
Of course.
Dr. Bamberger.
Never to miss an opportunity. As the physician in the room, I just want to point to a recent case in Montana called Held versus Montana, where 21 young people brought suit against the state of Montana, saying that oil and coal production directly worsens the health of young people through climate change. So it's a state that there's nothing you can think of to do to improve the health of people living in the Los Angeles basin. The one thing you could do is not to exist. So I do not believe that any health system should in any way be promoting the production of fossil fuels. I think there's a strong legal basis to show that the connection between fossil fuels and worsening health is significant. Thanks.
So just to address that, I don't 100% disagree with you. There's a lot of studies showing that fossil fuels are hazardous to the world through a climate change issue. What we have to grapple with and what a lot of the U.S. courts deal with is claims from U.S. citizens. Now, I know that the United States government is making a big push to try to phase off of oil demand, as opposed to trying to choke off the supply. To be very clear, I mean, at least it's my position, in a place like California, where I believe we use 1.8 million barrels of oil per day, and we only produce about 500,000 barrels a day. We are importing 1.3 million barrels per day into California to be used by the refineries. To the extent we further choke up supply in California, it's not like that oil is not going to be used. It's just going to be brought in through the ports on tankers. And I would hope that what the federal government is trying to do right now is really trying to take away the supply. And I think that that's where you see the real benefit come from, not just in, reducing oil supply, but really reducing the demand of oil. And I know that there's a big push in government funding to try to find alternative fuels, both through battery storage, such as lithium production in California and other states. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next few years.
Okay, one last, you probably don't know the top of your head, so just send our GFO a note for 2022, the revenues, profits, and the 2.5%, what those totals were.
I know that we tried to get those for today, for whatever reason, we were unable to, but I will make sure to have those sent to you,
Okay.
this week.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, our next task is back to recommendations. And 2003 is the next one. And
So there is an established legislative framework for dealing with non-compliant leases. And then the tail end of the recommendation talks about the positions that have been taken in Congress about whether or not this would benefit veterans, along with the positions we've heard expressed as the VCOEB. So those are the three elements.
Rob, you want to talk about the prep school and discipline or stuff?
I think we can revisit the discussion. You'll recall that last October, in October of 2022, we as a committee made a recommendation that the secretary should seek to renegotiate the Brentwood lease. And that recommendation followed the presentation we received from the OIG. That followed presentations we received from Brentwood. I think there was a real strong consensus at the time that this was not only a non-performing lease, but an obviously non-performing lease that needed to be rectified. That happened in October. And then this spring, about a month ago, you remember we got the secretary's response, which was in essence, we don't want to do anything to alter the current status quo because we're in litigation. We could debate whether that response makes sense, but that's the response we got from the secretary. So that's basically where we're at. Is that what you wanted me to cover, Joe?
Josh Pounder. No, I mean, also the fact that there seems to be strong evidence that the Brentwood School is funding the development of this legislation. And that if you follow the money, you see the Brentwood School providing support for a lobbyist who then wrote this piece of legislation and got a freshman congressperson in Oregon to carry it forward. And it feels like the Brentwood School is purposely doing an end around our committee because we brought attention to their lease that doesn't benefit veterans and that they're trying to get the OIG off their back. And I think as a committee, we have a responsibility to put light onto that movement of funds and to try to shut it down so that we are serving our charter to support the benefits of veterans against a hegemony of wealthy billionaires who are trying to manipulate activity.
Yeah, I mean, there is something worth adding, which is when you look at the proposed legislation before the House Veteran Affairs Committee, It not only allows non-compliant leases to be renewed, but it also changes the definition of what constitutes rent under federal law. So you'll remember that when the OIG came to us, they said, we think that the Brentwood lease violates law in two respects. It doesn't principally benefit veterans, and also the monetary consideration is not adequate because paying for upkeep of land doesn't constitute rent under law of general VA federal applicability. In other words, just as a matter of general contracting law, paying for upkeep of land is a rent, and that's what Brentwood was trying to do. And as Josh points out, those are the things that are being taken aim at in this proposed amendment. And the only party I'm aware of that benefits from both of those things being removed is Brentwood School. There are other non-compliant land uses on campus, according to the OIG, but the only one that has those two twin challenges is Brentwood.
And then the other part that I don't understand, and Keith has stepped out, but I didn't get this, and I think the committee really needs to know. It seems like the Secretary of the VA supports this legislation, and for reasons that seem to make sense. Like there's some benefit to the ability for Keith and others to do their job if this legislation goes through. And I haven't heard the positive benefits of this legislation yet. And maybe you understand it, Robin.
I'll just briefly do this, and then we gotta get into reading the record, which is the Secretary's response was to say he supports the legislation, but that if necessary, Section 3 could be decoupled. Because Section 2 and Section 4 are urgent issues for the department. They affect very basic authorities that the department needs. So can we go ahead and read it? I'm starting. We get into it.
I think you can. I'm sorry.
It's one thing we learned about it as a committee through other channels. And I found out that the leadership group of this board knew for at least a week. I'd like to make a request, and this has been a little bit historically, like we have not been getting information passed down, which is extremely frustrating because it doesn't allow me an opportunity and others on the board to use our avenues to advocate on our end. So I'd like to request the board leadership in the future to please pass down information that's critical at 30 to 40 minutes.
Yeah, let me just speak to that for a second. So those discussions were individual discussions. And any information gleaned there was subject to individual interpretation. The discussion never got far enough along that I at least was comfortable that there was something there to make the board informed of in order to make a future decision. And again, in my view, certainly nothing there that would affect our ability to consider the recommendation that you're about to hear right now. But your overall comment, we'll certainly make sure that information gets to the board as quickly as possible. And some of these issues, as you might know, for example, we broached the issue this morning of this ongoing local politician that's in some legal difficulty that may involve one of the principal developers. That issue has to come. We have no investigative ability and frankly no ability to comment on a recommendation on something like that with it may eventually have some merit at this particular point in time. So some of these things, it's very difficult to get that kind of out front and up front.
Jim, really, Rob, did the new information come in after you were drafting this thing? And could it possibly change our approach?
No, because we circulated a draft 2 weeks ago, right before the congressional hearing, and then we revised it and recirculated a new draft after the congressional hearing. The only change I've made, the only substantive change I've made since then is the American Legion, VFW, all provided statements for the record, and I've now inserted those in their entirety so that it's clear how people view this legislation.
So
vehicle in general. Keith wants to say something, but I don't know the point, I don't know where we are in our, this is weird, right? The 3 years, 3 years I've done this, we haven't had information that is so timely that would impact our ability to move on a recommendation. So we don't usually take testimony at this stage. What's the rule? When can you say anything? Should we hear the recommendation and then have conversation? What is it?
Well, we're not, it's not testimony. The recommendation is not on red and it's not been put on the floor. So if there's a contribution from P at this particular point in time, I think it's perfectly going to take it.
Okay, with that, I'm actually going to try to keep this brief because this quickly gets into the territory of lawyers, psychologists, but I do want to provide a little bit of the context that I gave to some of you one-to-one yesterday, but to give you the full group. The first thing is our support for this is based on the entirety of the picture. There's no reference to Brentwood in this language. Our support for this is not based on a particular feeling towards Brentwood and that situation one way or the other. As I mentioned yesterday, we are at a literal impasse with OIG in terms of their interpretation of what the leasing act and leasing agreement and ours and our attorneys. There is no path, there's no off-ramp, there's no pathway to resolution for those as we currently stand. To give you a couple real world examples of what this bill's language would help us resolve, many people talk to us about, quote, renegotiating the lease with Brentwood and doing something fairly substantially, seeing them doing something fairly substantially different with their leasehold. Examples like creating permanent or transitional housing portion of the leasehold, or the one you've talked about multiple times, creating a dedicated athletic facility. It would stand to reason that if an entity like Brentwood were to take on something of a significant financial outlay like that, it need time to recoup that investment. As it currently stands, we could not extend the lease. We could not renegotiate an extension of that lease to provide them that kind of time. That is the buying we're in. This kind of language would allow an extension or renegotiation of the lease. To give an even better example, in my opinion, the arrangement with Caltrans for the off-ramps, on and off ramps by 4 or 5, those are considered out of compliance by OIG. Were we to terminate that, VA, a healthcare system, would be stuck maintaining off-ramps and on-ramps for everyone. Makes zero sense. If that lease were to end, it turns out it's a 50-year lease, so we're talking way into the future, but still, if and when it was to end, if our current state is unchanged, we're stuck managing that. We can't negotiate a new lease with them to take care of their own freaking on-ramps and off-ramps. Those are the kind of binds we're in currently that this language helps us resolve. That, I hope, helps you understand our important work.
Okay. Let's read the recommendation.
Okay. VCOEB recommendation 20-03. Whereas the West Los Angeles Leasing Act of 2016 charged in subsection J3 that the Inspector General of the Department of Veteran Affairs shall submit a report to the Veteran Affairs Committee and Appropriations Committees of the U.S. Congress, quote, on all leases carried out of the campus and the management by the department of the use of the land of the campus. Whereas the IG has issued 2 audit reports on land use practices and both times determined VA's lease of land to the private Brentwood School for athletic facilities does not comply with federal law because 1, the lease does not principally benefit veterans, and 2, the lease's use of maintenance expenses towards rent does not qualify under federal law and therefore does not provide adequate monetary consideration. Whereas VA's lease of land to the private Brentwood School for athletic facilities was entered into after the West LA legislation was passed, so Brentwood School understood the requirements for its lease to comply with federal law in all respects, to include principally benefiting veterans. Whereas in October 2022, the VCOEB adopted recommendation 1801, which recommended that the department immediately begin negotiations with the Brentwood School to bring the lease into compliance with federal law. Whereas in November 2022, a group of veterans sued the department on several grounds, including that it was continuing to engage in illegal land use agreements, naming the lease to Brentwood School, among others. Whereas in May 2023, the secretary stated he did not concur with our recommendation and justified his non-concurrence as follows. While VA is limited in its ability to respond to this recommendation due to ongoing litigation, we may revisit this recommendation and update our response upon adjudication of this issue. At this time, VA cannot take action to alter or amend the terms of any land use agreements subject to the litigation, as it may impact the government's litigation posture. Whereas VA's current lease of land to the Brentwood School was executed on November 4th, 2016, and will expire in 2026 if not renewed. Whereas under the West LA legislation, for the lease to be renewed, the Secretary needs to certify to Congress that he has implemented the recommendations of the OIG report, which include coming up with a plan for bringing non-compliant land use agreements such as Brentwood School into compliance with federal law. I'm not going to read it, but here we've excerpted the relevant provisions of the West LA Leasing Act that allow the Secretary to renew non-compliant leases. Whereas House Resolution 3848 was introduced on June 6, 2023 by Representative Lori Chavez de Raymer of Oregon's 5th District. Section 3 of H.R. 3848 attempts to amend the West LA Leasing Act of 2016 in two key areas. Notably, it attempts to remove the current provision in order for a lease that OIG has deemed non-compliant to be renewed, the Secretary must certify to Congress that he has adopted the recommendation of the OIG's audit. Additionally, the legislation proposes to modify 40 U.S.C. 1302 such that, quote, consideration other than money, e.g. in-kind services, be acceptable forms of rental payment under the West LA lease. And then whereas on June 4th, 2023, the House Committee on Veteran Affairs Economic Opportunity Subcommittee conducted a bill hearing which included H.R. 3848. And there's 4 bullets under this. The first one excerpts the American Legion's written testimony in opposition to Section 3848. Briefly, I'm not going to read the entirety, but the American Legion's position is this mechanism is still necessary to hold the VA accountable for its decisions involving the West LA campus on behalf of veterans. The veteran of foreign wars also provided written testimony opposed to the section. And their statement, among other things, said, we are unaware of a particular burden that prohibits VA or its lessees from following the law. The DAV Department of California also submitted a statement in opposition to the Section 3 amendment, pointing out that H.R. 3848 will dismantle the authority identified for the private interests. And the American Legion Department of California submitted a statement opposed to the Section 3 amendment, pointing out, among other things, the changes proposed in H.R. 3848 will eliminate OIG authority to the benefit of private interests. So if you're interested, all of those positions expressed before Congress are available at the House website, and that's cited in the information. Whereas it is apparent that Section 3 of H.R. 3848 is being sought for the benefit of Brentwood School, as Brentwood School is the only leaseholder on campus that faces these twin problems. Whereas other prior land use agreements that serve private interests have been terminated when they did not principally benefit veterans, such as the revocable license to the Red Cross. Whereas VA provided written testimony in support of amending the West LA Leasing Act per Section 3 of H.R. 3848, but suggesting that it could be decoupled because it was not an urgent need. And there we quoted the VA's testimony. Though VA supports this section, VA would support decoupling this section from other sections in this package to expedite progress on this bill. But notably, VA did not claim that it had a plan to bring the non-compliant leases into compliance with federal law, a clear mandate from Congress. We're getting close. Whereas during the VCOEB meeting of June 21st, yesterday, members of the public and veterans who appeared before the committee voiced their opposition to the attempt to circumvent the West LA Leasing Act proposed by the amendment. Whereas it is the opinion of VCOEB that this proposed amendment is an improper attempt by a powerful special interest, Brentwood School, to surreptitiously circumvent the clear intent and purpose of the original West LA Leasing Act, and in particular its requirement that all leases on the West LA campus principally benefit veterans and their families. Finally, the recommendation. Recommendation 20-03, the Secretary of Veteran Affairs instruct the Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs to inform House and Senate VA committee staff that the department no longer supports Section 3 of H.R. 3848, having heard strong opposition from veteran groups such as the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Disabled American Veterans, and the Veterans and Community Oversight and Engagement Board.
Yes.
This is Mark Wells for the record. I move that we discuss it.
Okay, you move to the motion to be approved. Do you second?
Can we have discussion first?
No, yeah, we'll get into it. Right. Second, member. Discussion.
Well, what's going on? What do you think? It's not part of John, can you comment on this?
On
No, I don't think it'd be a good idea.
Well, Jim said plan was up to us. Was it? Okay, sorry.
I mean, Keith, I know you can't comment on this, so I get a one-sided criticism. It seems to me that the VA could successfully comply with the West LA Leasing Act and renegotiate the lease so that the lease primarily benefits veterans. And I don't think it is honest to say that you're in this unachievable bind that you cannot renew the lease and comply with the law. I think what needs to be fleshed out is how can the Brentwood School successfully primarily benefit veterans and be in compliance with the West LA Leasing Act. And that's why I would continue to support this recommendation so that we will hold the VA accountable to do what is the point of our committee, which is to primarily benefit veterans.
Jim Center.
Jim Center, extremely well written, great job. To that subcommittee here, I think it's real estate. Faster, something like that. Wasn't the thing long. It's really well written. It's offensive that the idea of running the school to go back and try to strip away authority and get more impact when we've really criticized authority, their misuse of the impact donation. So, back to my earlier point, it's disheartening to not be involved in this communication because another part of 3848 is the attempt to underfund programs, which is the third piece that as a county we oppose as well. Because grant per diem is basically a blanket payment across the country. So if you're in Mississippi, you can afford to provide some good services to homeless vets. If you're in LA County, all your per diem rate is going to the building, to pay the building. And you can't really, do things like create a program. And so, that's part of the reason why we have such a high unhoused population here in LA County, in my opinion, is because we have a lot of congregate living transitional sites that veterans refuse to go into post-COVID because they had an opportunity to have their own rooms and home key and all that stuff. And so that's, that's something that, when you leave the services subcommittee at the kitty table and don't bring them to the big table, we can't have that type of until this is the first of the recommendation. So I just want to double down on the request from leadership to please this kind of thing plug us in earlier. So I moved. I would like to see this passed.
Yeah, just, I thought the recommendation was so fine for the services subcommittee.
It was not that long.
That's it.
Okay. Mr. Boyle.
Keith Will of the record and Mr. Jim Furley for questions. The others can respond. I think it's important for us to, perhaps consider a little bit of reading between the lines of the Secretary's response. But also be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We talked about a few things and Mr. Obviously Mr. Guys very passionate about an issue that I personally took badger from a lot of different sides on, that I had to defend for a state purpose and a local purpose. And I know there's a variety of things on this campus that might be affected by this decision, and there's one in particular that we are concerned about. And, in my experience, folks are often savvy enough to understand when they see leverage, they grab leverage and they try to get things through at particular times in order to achieve that, because they understand they have people put a rock in a hard place. And we're on the oversight side of that. And I think that's important. But in our efforts to make sure we're watching the register that's in front of us, we got to make sure we're also sensitive to the fact that folks have to watch many registers. So that's just a consideration, just something to think about. But also down the road, and I know kicking a can is not ideal, but down the road, perhaps, when some of these things flesh out to litigation and so forth, would there then be opportunity for, not to ask that question here clearly, but we should consider perhaps the VA that would have the opportunity to go in, perhaps choose another direction as to how they want to address this. Once as in the Secretary's response, some things are cleared off the table.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, sir. Mark Twain had a famous line: if you want to win an argument, start by being right. And I have to say, talk candidly among friends, the agency's on the wrong side of this issue. And the faster that it moves to the right side of the issue, the better it'll be for everyone. This is a lease that does not meet the test. And the OIG's legal analysis is good, and the agency's response to its OIG is weak. That's why we passed the recommendation we did last fall. And I think the Secretary made a mistake not acting on that recommendation as original pass. And I'm not naive about the way this stuff works. It may be that DOJ has taken this out of the agency's hands and said, now that it's a federal lawsuit, we're going to define how we respond to the lawsuit. But to me, this is a real basic issue. And the most tone-deaf moments we've seen as a committee was when Brentwood presented to us a year and a half ago. We all were like looking at ourselves thinking, is this it? And there was even this argument that they enjoyed some kind of special relationship, just like UCLA did. We all went back and we looked at the legislation and we were like, no, you have to meet the same test as any other land user on this campus. And what we're seeing today is that they still don't believe that. They still think they should have a special test. So, I mean, for me, this is, I think we should all form a consensus around this, but I also think we're going to hit this really interesting point in the agency. If we don't see this handled more responsibly, it's going to be this really hard question of why isn't the secretary getting the hit on this issue? Because this committee has led very successfully on this. You know, we anticipated the idea of a lawsuit. You know, we actually made our recommendation before the lawsuit dropped. So I don't even think it's a close call. I think we ought to form a consensus around this. I think what's going to be important for us is to closely monitor it.
I remember.
John, just one last comment. Personally, I think there's plenty of room for the private school. I think it's a fine school. There are a lot of good people educated at it, and it should be there for a long time. That's not the issue. The issue is they need to be in compliance with what your relatives provided in the VA, which is a beautiful place for disabled veterans to live, and if you can't primarily benefit veterans. And I think they can. I really believe there's some way through this legal area so that the Brentwood School can continue to provide an excellent education for young people and support primary benefit of veterans.
Jim Center and then Mark.
Jim Center. Yeah, I respect your opinion. But as a veteran who lives in LA, went through the homeless program in LA, and most of the time I spend outside of work hanging out with formerly homeless veterans like myself, with veterans that are gone for a while, that live in LA, and it's a betrayal. Like the fact that Brentwood School went and worked on this, it is a straight up betrayal. And I just respectfully disagree with the fact that there's a place for Brentwood School. After this, I don't think there's a place for Brentwood School anywhere.
Yeah, Dr. Welch. And this is Mark Welch. I want to argue in favor of this recommendation. And comments. Their in-kind compensation is nonsense. I think it's unquestionably never been used, or almost never. It's ridiculous. The fact that they don't want to pay $1, and yet they're a very wealthy school. They're exceedingly well endowed, and there's no reason they couldn't come up with the money. And in lieu of the money, they could come up with the education. They sent a note back that I thought was patently insulting, that the vets couldn't have children who went to that school or qualified for that school. My kid went. I'm a vet. Yes. So I find that there is some benefit to veterans and families through that school alone. Besides that, it just humiliates us as a group to say they're better than us, and that's not true. It's clearly not true. And then to the argument that Keith made that the facilities, when they go fallow, it'll be our responsibility to keep them up. Well, I'm 80. I started at the VA as a resident in 1971, and I watched the whole damn VA go fallow. We're now busily trying to rehabilitate the parts of the VA that I watched disintegrate over the last 50 years. It's mind-boggling. So we need to let the VA secretary know what our feelings are. And this is an exceedingly good recommendation, and I totally support it. And we as a group need to continue to support our vets. It's not happening if this incredibly carefully designed part of this law goes through. It's horrible.
Thank you, Martin. Keith.
I just want to add, it's your right, I mean, you know, as they say, two things are equally true. In this case, they about 10 things are equally true. And I think there's no debate. I think everybody here agrees with resolution without a doubt. I guess my point is, bigger to your point, I think you're spot on. When you talk about DOJ, I can't even list the number of times where I was dealing with for-profit colleges or whatever the case may be, where the VA got sideways and we were in a situation where they simply kind of done not comment on anything. Because now, you're right, that's what happens. DOJ steps in, tells VA's general counsel, this is what we're doing, moving forward, this is frozen in time until we tell you it's not. We just need to, my point was just, we just all need, even among, you know, between in Chuck and Jim, I think there's very different viewpoints on what role the school has. I think there's some concept of just pay man type of mentality where I think we all can agree that there's something there that they're not getting, that they, what that looks like, how it shakes out, a whole other story. But with this, I mean, I make a statement, it's fine, perhaps discussion for a different time, but as a board, perhaps as a committee, perhaps there's some opportunity for us to Jim's point, take some other avenues and approaches to this as well. I think that would, along with the resolution, perhaps kids on some portion, at least a little bit. But yeah, I certainly think for the resolution. Yes, it's like it.
Do you have a comment? You're ready. Any other comments, discussion? Yeah, okay. Before we vote, just add my impression. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it actually breaks down fairly clearly for me. The charter is to do this for the vets and the restoration of the soldiers' home for the benefit, this land for the benefit of veterans. I think we clearly understand how veterans view this particular lease. They agree with the OIG that the compensation has not been there, and that the lease is the leaseholder is not performing. We've already provided one recommendation, 1801, and certainly with all respect to the position that the secretary finds himself in at a particular point in time, I think we are clearly on the right side of this with this particular recommendation. It's unfortunate that it's personalized to the Brentwood School with the connections are clear. There's no walking away from that. So I like the recommendation. I think it speaks well for how the committee understands the situation, understands what needs to be done, and we can certainly, with a straight face and a straight back, talk to our colleagues, say that we did what we should have done in this situation. So I'm ready to vote as well. So we'll take a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, passes unanimous. And how about online? Did we get?
We're all good.
Thank you. Okay, that finishes our recommendations, and I think we're ready to move into subcommittee discussions. No, we're not. Okay, so we're going. Yeah. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjourn our meeting, but I'd ask board members to stay in place. Not yet. Before we adjourn, officially adjourn, any comments for the record? Jim Pearl's gonna come in. So surprised.
Now, this is my first comment.
Yes, John, yes, it is.
As you know, I'd like to ask John, a question about occupancy on off-site veterans developments. A few months ago, you mentioned that having trouble filling, the consequences of the tax credit was explained. I wondered if you might give us an update on how that's going.
Sure, let me, John, let me just, I actually have stats that could be broken up. Hold on.
Well, John is pulling those out, just a couple of thank yous along the way. Jim Center, thank you for Bob, Patriotic Hall. It was a great. And to the staff of the Patriotic Hall, who have all been very accommodating, including the sheriff's department and any other police departments other than sheriff's department. Here, well done, thank you.
Okay, so we have, John, again, so we have 262 current project-based vacancies. And there's an asterisk for that. So the 262, 48 of them can't be used because of the condition of the units suitable for habitation. So 262 minus 48, one wants to do that. Of those remaining vacancies, we have 181 active referrals. So most of the vacancies are accounted for. In addition to that, this is about, we have 1,400 total units. So we have an occupancy rate of, if anyone wants to get into the math, of something like 81 to 3%. Once you exclude out the uninhabitable units, and of the ones that are vacant, the majority of them have active referrals.
Yeah, Jim Hurley. As you know, if you're on tax credits and you don't fill it 100% right away, there's a severe penalty. If you fill it right away and then have vacancies later, it's a whole different deal. Do you have info on that or?
Well, so we've done our part by giving referrals. It's up to the property manager to process those referrals through. Sometimes we end up losing veterans because, as you've heard, we make these referrals and then the referrals sit for weeks or months waiting to be processed or admitted into a program. And veterans don't always want to wait weeks or months for a property manager to make the determination that they can come to the building. They find other housing, they get lost.
Yeah, just to add on real quick, I'm sorry to jump back there. That's kind of Jim, that's why I was talking to Shunder Law and them about that situations, because they all feel part of it is making them jump through a bunch of unnecessary hoops and they just give up on the system and then we can't find them and get them through the process. I just want to add that on the lip jumps.
And I think that's why also Josh was suggesting that getting a type of system where we can get people all together in a compressed period of time. So one of the things we're consistently trying to get is prior to these buildings opening, can we get visits so we can bring veterans to the units, you can see the units, you can get a little excitement going. We were having struggles doing that in some of these programs where the veterans couldn't see the units, they were being asked to commit to housing that they hadn't seen. And then the deadline, because the delays in development come up, that end up pushing this financing out so that they're, they have to fill the next 2 weeks and they haven't even owned the building yet.
Just as we're wrapping up, to honor your 20 meetings, this will be the last time you're going to be in Los Angeles for a meeting. We'll have one more in DC, but it's possible that many of you won't be attending, so I just wanted to take a moment to thank you, John Harper and Phil Lugano and Anthony Allman, and I don't even know who else are being turned out, but you have done extraordinary work. Thank you.
Affirmative. Sure. Okay. I'm sorry,
Just a super quick. So yesterday during conversations, we learned that there's 600 veterans that are in homes that are not on the by name list. We just want to see, is there a plan to put them on the by name list so we have them look complete by names?
Absolutely.
You mean in the briefings yesterday when they mentioned 600 names?
Yeah, or side conversations, something like that.
Okay, I'm going to continue with the thank yous and wrap this up. The GLA Veteran Canteen Service for all of the snacks over here. Don't forget the folks who work more of it, the donuts out as well. Rob Merchant leads that canteen service. And
Sell tires and television.
I'm sorry, I said, I said, yeah. Our contract staff down at the end, they captured all of our words, even the performance. And finally, the trustee DFO staff, Mr. Skinner, Mr. Chihanziva, and Jeff Riz. Thank you. Okay, that's going to be it. It was a good meeting. It was actually a great meeting. And I know we've probably handed the secretary another hot potato. That's a good gang. They'll figure out pretty good stuff. We are adjourned. Board members, not so bad.
Thank you to everyone online who attended. We are going offline.
Official meeting.
Mr. Walton is on.
Adjourn the meeting early so we can break out, okay? So we're gonna have the master plan subcommittee stay in this room. The services subcommittee go through that far door to the left, not the exit. Okay. There's room in there for the services subcommittee to meet. And then I'll sit with one subcommittee and he will be with the other. So that's all I have.
Let me ask him.